Good afternoon and welcome to the special meeting of the Glendale City Council being held today on September 13th, 2022. May we have roll call, please?
Yes, council members Asatrian.
Here.
Brotman.
Here.
Divine.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Mayor Kasakian.
Here. Thank you. May we have your report?
The agenda for Tuesday, September 13, 2022 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on September 7th, 2022 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
All right, great. And may we have the items before us this afternoon?
Yes. Community development regarding update on the Tropico Transit-Oriented District, TOD, and presentation of the draft Tropico Design and Development Standards. A motion to receive report and provide direction on the proposed zoning text and map amendments for the Tropico Transit-Oriented District.
All right. Mr. Galanian.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Kasakian, member of City Council. The first item this afternoon is related to the Tropico Transit-Oriented Development. This area, Tropico neighborhood, is the area surrounding the Glendale Transportation Center, and staff this afternoon will be presenting some zoning modifications that include objective design and development standards for your consideration, as well as some modifications to the parking standards. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vilya Zemetitis, our principal planner, and there are staff from the City Attorney's Office and other planners that will be able to respond to your questions. Ms. Zemetitis.
Thank you, Mr. Galanian. Mayor Kasakian, council members, as mentioned, these are new zoning standards that are being presented before City Council, and this is for your feedback. So this is essentially a check-in. We'd like your feedback because these zoning standards, if we were to continue or based on your comments, we will be modifying and updating our multifamily design guidelines as well as our commercial corridor and mixed-use guidelines. So your feedback is really important at this point. And with that, I'd like to turn your attention to the PowerPoint presentation. Planning efforts for this area were based on a grant from Metro a while back with regards to the surrounding area, as mentioned, around the Glendale Transit Center. The Metro grant then led to a policy plan deemed the Tropico Center Plan, and that was prepared in part with the South Glendale Community Plan. The Tropico Center Plan consisted of policies and recommendations, and these were specifically devoted to promote transit and to support pedestrian-friendly and transit-oriented development in the area. Back in July of 2018, as part of the South Glendale Community Plan, City Council adopted the Tropico Center Plan, also initiated the zoning implementation for the Tropico area, and also certified the South Glendale Community Plan EIR. And I'll note the area in question is at the bottom of the map presented for you. This is the South Glendale Community Plan map. The area is at the very south end of the city, and that's highlighted in purple and outlined in yellow. The Glendale Transit Center is identified with a red star. Back in 2020, we received a grant from the state, the Community Housing and Community Development Department. It was approximately $625,000. This would be to complete a number of different projects that included the Tropico zoning, as well as objective design standards for multifamily development and the commercial corridor zoning standards as well. So we are funding these efforts with a state grant. And again, just as stated before, the zoning standards that you are reviewing and commenting on today will set the precedent, the framework for the future multifamily design, objective design standards, as well as the commercial corridor standards. The images you see on the screen before you, on the left, would be the current existing zoning map. The area is outlined in black. The TOD1, what we consider TOD1 area, essentially includes portions on the westerly side of San Fernando Road, These are areas that are currently zoned IMUR, which is highlighted in purple, which is an industrial, commercial, residential zone, and also the SFMU zone, which is the area in yellow, the commercial residential mixed-use zone. The TOD2 outlines, and those would be the ones in light gray on the right-hand side of your screen, those are currently C3 commercial services areas, and TOD3 is the area essentially surrounding the Glendale Memorial Hospital. So we are proposing 3 different TOD districts. The TOD1 is essentially, again, a commercial, industrial, and mixed-use district. TOD1, again, is the SFMU and the IMUR zone, which is by right today up to 100 units to the acre, and we're proposing a height of up to 60 feet. Just note that the South Glendale, as part of the South Glendale Community Plan, City Council essentially said no density increases. This would be for the area in South Glendale in totality, except for the Glendale Hospital area, which City Council back in 2018 said, yes, you can increase that density in that area up to 100 units to the acre, and you allowed also a height increase of up to 200 feet. In the TOD2, which again in the light gray, the current zoning is C3. This would allow for density limits consistent with the R1250 standards. This is the high density residential zoning, which would allow 43 units to the acre for project sites that are greater than 90 feet in height. Residential zoning, again, is based on the R1250 standards, and so in this area, we're keeping, based on council's direction, the height or the density limit at 43 units to the acre and proposing a height limit of up to 60 feet. Last but not least, TOD3, the hospital zone. Again, currently it is C3, height district 3, which would allow densities up to 43 units to the acre and a maximum height of 90 feet. And per council's direction, TOD3 is going to go up to a density limit of 100 units to the acre and a height of up to 200 feet. Staff was really cognizant of the fact that we are proposing a mixed-use zoning set of criteria that is meant to fit within our existing zoning code framework, but is going to also be introducing objective design standards. So the zoning itself would be a new chapter. It would be Glendale Municipal Code Chapter 30.16, the TOD zoning chapter. It would feature the same standardized formats as currently in our zoning code, a land use table, land use charts. Just want to point out at this point that the land use chart for the TOD1, TOD2, and TOD3 are based on current underlying permitted and conditionally permitted uses. So TOD1, because the underlying current zone is SFMU and IMUR, we took into that account in the same land uses that are permitted or conditionally permitted would be the same for the TOD1. Same with TOD2 for C3, yet TOD3 is more geared toward medical related uses consistent with the hospital zoning. What is new would be the incorporation of objective design standards. Now, these are much more in line with the current downtown specific plan. It's very graphic heavy. Illustrations are emphasized over text. So this would be the introduction of a graphic oriented zoning code set of standards. And that is what we're also hoping to relay into the new update of the multifamily standards and zoning and also to the commercial corridors. So you'll note here, table on the left, this would be the standard land use table that would be featured in every other single zoning chapter in terms of land uses, commercial, residential, mixed use, industrial. And the table on the right would be the standard development standards table that addresses densities, height limits, landscaping requirements, and whatnot. The objective design standards are broken up into 3 types of sections. Again, these would be very similar sections to the DSP, the site planning, which would be to promote pedestrian-oriented public realms, to include publicly accessible open space, and also to screen parking. The second section would be a series of standards for massing and scale. And these would be to reduce the massing and encourage human scale design. And last but not least would be a series of architectural element standards. And this again would be to encourage the high quality design through materials and articulation. So I'll go into that in a little bit of detail in a little while. First step would be site planning. We are proposing a series of standards for the public realm, which would require a minimum 15-foot setback. A parkway would be required with street trees along every public right-of-way, a minimum of 5 feet. Then you have a sidewalk zone of 6 feet and a building adjacent zone of 4 feet. There's a set of standards for building setbacks, and these would depend on what type of uses are at the ground floor, whether it's commercial or whether it's residential. Again, this is to make sure that the street front is activated at the pedestrian level. So you'll note here, these would be some of the graphics and diagrams that would be included in the proposed zoning. We also have a graphic, again, showing the commercial ground floor level on the upper right-hand side versus what we might see in the lower level for residential uses. And just note that the next set of sections deals with publicly accessible open space. Currently, in this Tropico area, based on today's zoning, no publicly accessible open space is required. So staff is proposing to require publicly accessible open space for projects that are greater than 60 feet in width. So this would be a new introduction of publicly accessible open space with similar standards to the DSP courtyard and paseo section. Last but not least, parking design and access standards. Again, this is regulating the amount of parking that's provided at the ground floor level and where that can be accessed. And if a project is adjacent to an alley, we are essentially requiring that access be taken off an alley. There are very few alleys in the Tropico area, so this would only apply to a limited number of properties. But if there is an alley access, that is where the access to the parking should be provided. And this is, again, to incentivize that pedestrian realm. We definitely want a pedestrian-oriented public realm area around the metro station, just because, you know, we are assuming individuals are going to walk to the metro station. This is going to be a walkable community and adjacent to mass transit to incentivize that use. Next up, under massing and scale, this would be to reduce the overall massing and scale of buildings in the area. One would be the requirement of upper floor step backs. So any building that's over 50 feet in height would require an upper floor step back of an average of 6 feet. There's also no requirement for upper floor step backs if the buildings are less than 50 feet or adjacent to publicly accessible open space, because there's a little bit of relief in smaller scale buildings. Next up would be facade modulations, again, to reduce the massing and scale. First one would be vertical modulation. Any building that's 4 stories or more would have to have a top, a middle, and a base. As again, this is the tripartite type of design would be consistent with what we see in the DSP. Next up would be, instead of vertical going, you know, up and down the building, this is going across the building. So first up would be street-facing horizontal modulation. So any building that's wider than a certain length, I think it's 60 feet, you would have to have modulation, meaning that there's some recesses or projections. And again, the standards go into the amount and the detailing. If a building is longer than 250 linear feet, you'd also have to have a building separation to cut down the massing. If the building turns a corner, we have interior horizontal facade modulations, meaning the facade of the street front has to wrap the interior corner of the building itself. And there is a corner elements, but we do not have a graphic at this point in time. But if you have a corner at an intersection, that intersection corner would have to be modulated and articulated to make it much more interesting, since it's at the intersection of 2 streets. Last but not least, architectural elements. And this might be familiar to City Council because we have a very similar structure in the DSP. We go through materials and colors, storefront transparency, building entries, lobbies, fenestration, balconies. We go through the entire itemized list of what these standards might be. There are 2 new subsections. One would be storefront transparency. We want to make sure that any storefronts along this the San Fernando Road, because this area, again, is the terminus of Central Avenue, the terminus of Brand, and also the endpoint of San Fernando Road, that if there are any storefronts, that they be visible and accessible to individuals and pedestrians. And last but not least, that there would be locational and design standards for building entries and lobbies.
Can I ask a quick question? Who's pro tem?
Go ahead,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember,
can I ask a
go
quick
ahead,
question?
Councilmember Bobby.
About the storefront, just if you could go back, the storefront visibility,
Yes,
what you're called transparency,
transparent.
that's only for certain streets? You mentioned San Fernando, or is that going to be across the TOD?
It's going to be across the TOD. Now, for the storefronts that are located along San Fernando Road, along Central, and along Brand, those have a greater transparency requirement. So we are essentially, there is an intent to have those prime street frontages have more windows, more glazing, more glass doors. The other streets, because there's more minor streets that are like the ones along between San Fernando Road and Gardena, the train station, those would have a slightly lower transparency limit of 60% versus the major streets would have a 75% minimum standard for transparency. So yes, across the board, all streets would have a transparency.
You're making that distinction, okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Yes,
if I may,
please.
Mr. Mayor. Along Central, we have mixed use and we have windows, but now they are covered with advertisements. And so there goes the transparency, as far as I'm concerned. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes, the window signage is limited to 25%. So that is a violation of our zoning code. We would be requiring window transparency as part of the zoning of these updates. If there are issues with windows signage that does not meet our code, that would be a neighborhood services issue.
Okay, well, I'm reporting that on Central, across the street from the Onyx. They're all advertisements. You can't see anything in those windows, so that's a violation, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen around the city.
We will take note then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And forgive me, I'm going back. And also, we have a section with regards to open space and landscaping. Again, this is just to briefly mention, SFMU, IMUR, and C3 zones, there is no requirement for publicly accessible open space. There would be for the new TOD zoning in similar standards as in the DSP for courtyards and paseos. Residential open space standards would be consistent with what is in today's code, 140 square feet per unit. It can be provided in terms of common open space, private open space, rooftop decks, and again, similar design standards in the DSP. Before council is also a proposition by staff to consider possibly increasing the density in the proposed TOD zone 2, which has a limit right now of 43 units to the acre. Oh, and I apologize, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay. Apologies here. We are proposing a series of parking amendments, and this is in order to incentivize development of transit-oriented projects, and this would be adjacent, obviously, to the Glendale Transit Center, and also to reduce the costly impediments towards such pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented development. The series of amendments includes allowing at-grade parking for residential uses. Current zoning standards prohibit parking at grade for residential units. We require either semi-subterranean or subterranean parking. This would be a code amendment. So in this TOD zone, we would allow for parking at grade for residential uses. We'd also allow tandem spaces in certain areas and situations, and this would be consistent with what is allowed in the downtown specific plan. We would also modify the residential use parking requirement for the ratios, 1 or 2 bedroom units, to match those in the DSP. And we would also require larger projects to be consistent with the DSP in terms of trip reduction and travel demand measures. So again, this would be focusing to incentivize reduced parking in this area because of its proximity to the Glendale Transit Center. And this is getting to the staff's proposition, would be the density considerations for the TOD. Again, the density limits currently proposed comply with council's direction not to increase the density except for the TOD3, the hospital area. In the C3 zone, which would be the TOD2 zone, marked in light gray, the density limit would be consistent with the R1250 standards of 43 units to the acre. There's a lot of untapped potential to develop residential and mixed-use zone or development in this area. If it would be consistent with the TOD1 area, that is what staff is, and this is just an idea that we are presenting to City Council for you to direct whether or not, would you consider at this time, and this development was studied under the South Glendale Community Plan, final EIR. But again, this is for your consideration. Should we maintain the current density limit in the TOD2 zone, or would you consider possibly increasing that density to match and to allow for up to 100 units to the acre because it is within a half-a-mile radius of the Glendale Transit Center? Right now, this particular this ordinance for your feedback is exempt from any type of environmental review and CEQA analysis. And the next steps would be to take your comments on what is being presented to you today, and we would incorporate those comments, finalize the TOD zoning, bring it before the Design Review Board, the Planning Commission, and bring it back to you for introduction and adoption at a future date, possibly in early 2023 for council's direction. Note that a lot of the ideas were already vetted as part of the South Glendale Community Plan outreach that was done, extensive outreach that was done over 5 years. So this would simply be the implementation of clear and concise objective standards in the new zoning to implement the Tropico Center plan. That concludes staff's presentation. I would also like to introduce Ryan Banuelos, who's been a great help with his graphic and urban design skills. So we want to thank Ryan. And we have been working in conjunction with Crandall Arambula, who is the consultant on this as well.
Thank you. Who would like to comment or ask questions? Yes.
I have questions.
Councilmember Devine.
First of all, questions. What is the benefit of at-grade parking besides the fact that it's less expensive for the developer?
Essentially, it is less expensive for the developer. There's easier access instead of having individuals go down in a subterranean garage, ease of access, a development incentive, and I believe Mr. Calvert would like to
weigh in
to chime in on that.
I'll try my best.
Okay.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Part of the reason behind that was as well, this work is going to lead into the work we do for the citywide multi-family development standards and commercial corridors. Prior to that work launching, what we heard largely from stakeholders, developers, is that a property may be able to is zoned for maybe 12 units, but the requirement of that subterranean parking or other development standards is actually making it more difficult for them to achieve maximum density, not to go above, but in kind of regards to making sure that our properties are achieving the housing that we say that they will in the housing element. By easing some of these restrictions, it makes it a little bit easier for them to get to that. What we were finding is a lot of these smaller parcels, which there are quite a few in the Tropico area, is that maybe they could get to 8 to 10 units, but they were only able to build 6 because of some of the requirements. So part of that direction, I believe that was about a year and a half ago that we received from council, was to look at how we can ease some of those rules to make sure those properties can achieve the maximum allowable density.
I know that these sorts of regulations are always, have been in the past a bone of contention because of the inability to develop.
If I can add one more thing to that parking would be screened. It's not going to be visible. There will be lobbies or use or something in front of that. So if you have a 60-foot wide property, all of that parking is going to be concealed behind some sort of active storefront, active use that's there.
Okay, and she made reference to it would make it easier or something for pedestrians to walk to transit. What's the nexus between at-grade parking, just the fact that you can walk out of it?
I think just easier access in general. I think really it's more about making sure that these properties can actually achieve that maximum density, particularly what we quote in our housing element, that's what these sites are able to provide and that we can get there.
And, Mayor Kasaki, Member City Council, Councilmember Brown, Councilmember Devine. I'm not advocating for at-grade, disclaimer, I'm not advocating for at-grade parking, but it would have the benefit, environmental benefit of not doing the construction for subterranean parking and all the removal of dirt and hauling of dirt away and all the construction that goes with it.
All right. Go ahead, Delia.
Thank you, Councilmember Devine. Council, yes, that was going to be my comment, that all parking it would be screened as required by the proposed TOD zoning, so with active uses. Also note at this time that there is an Assembly Bill 2097, which at this point has not been signed by the governor, but has been has gone through the state assembly and Senate, which would essentially eliminate any parking requirements for commercial and residential uses within a half a mile of any major transit stop. And so that might affect the Tropico TOD zoning. We will keep abreast of that legislation. And if there are any changes when we come back, we will make note of that and update our TOD zoning standards accordingly.
Great, okay. I know that when I attend SCAG, we just had a report on the transit-oriented development, and there's a CEHD committee, and of course they are promoting transit-oriented development, and this falls right into it with complete streets, open space, and the building type. So I think you're falling right into that. As far as my considerations on this and my concerns. First of all, I'd like for you to investigate the changing of the distance between the trees. 25 feet seems a large distance, takes these trees a long time to grow and for the canopy to develop, and therefore the pedestrian, it's not really pedestrian friendly. And I think maybe a few more trees, less distance apart. I know that's a minor consideration in this plan, but I think it's really important for pedestrian friendliness. The landscape setbacks, I'm really concerned about those. We mentioned that, for instance, on the non-residential use setback, and there's very little landscaping area in those setbacks. And so I know along Central, a lot of the development does not have any kind of landscaping, and it makes for a very hardscape, and it's not really friendly. And so I'd like to see that happen. I actually would not oppose the increasing the density limit for the TOD2 to be consistent with the TOD1, because I agree. I think there's we have to look at these untapped transit-oriented areas for development. There's a huge potential there. Thank you. I also I'm happy about the open space. I think that's great that you're putting this into the plan. The modulation, of course, I'm always interested in interesting architecture, not the same old square block buildings. And I had a question about one of the slides you had on that about the 3 stories, and you said the first 2 stories. Yes. Now, what separates the first story from the next few stories? What kind of modulation is there?
The slide on the screen, the tripartite vertical modulation, you would have a ground floor level, whether
Okay,
it's a different materials or the architectural treatment. Maybe there's a string course or banding, or there's awnings over the storefront.
Okay.
There's a storefront
Right.
awning requirement. So that there is a different look at the storefront or the ground floor level than there would be from the actual middle section, the base of the building, which would include windows.
Oh, but
Windows
it's
and
still
design-
straight up and down? It's still
It would not
facade?
It wouldn't be a solid. Again, there would be required articulation, but that there would be a distinction, either whether with architectural elements or materials or colors, a distinction at the base from the middle and then from the top. So breaking down the overall massing of the building into essentially a top, middle, and base.
Okay, it seems like there could be more done, more modulation somehow, design in that.
Oh.
That this is just the first.
This is just a very conceptual graphic representation
Okay.
of a tripartite building. This
great.
doesn't have.
Okay, and finally, my last comment is about walls and fences. And like, for instance, in this mass and scale right here that we're looking at, making sure that there is some sort of landscaping around that building, that it doesn't appear as just one concrete block. Walls and fences have landscaping. And that's my comment. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Councilmember Asatryan.
First and foremost, I want to thank staff. I think this is a great report you've put together with great recommendations. I have some questions. You noted the public open space is similar to the standards in the DSP. I've had concerns with particularly the lack of green space on Central Avenue. Can you walk me through how what you're proposing is different than what we currently have on Central Avenue?
That's a very good question, Councilmember Asatryan. Apologies. The most recent set of downtown specific plan updates required definitely more usable, landscaped, publicly accessible open space. Previously, the standards were rather lacking in teeth, and many of those projects along Central Avenue featured the bare bones minimal type of publicly accessible open space at a corner that wasn't open to the sky, didn't have required landscaping. All of those such standards in the DSP during our last update in 2018 have greatly increased the amount, the design, the amount of publicly accessible open space, the design of the courtyards and the paseos, the landscaping that's required. So unfortunately, those existing projects were under the old DSP standards. So the newer projects definitely are going to be much more improved over what you see today. Not the same, comparing apples to oranges in terms of the development standards for publicly accessible open space.
I have some concerns about the fact that you were requiring the public open space for lots greater than 60 feet. I understand why you're trying to do that, but if it's possible for us to even use the spaces in between buildings to maybe create green space or some city squares where there's just a couple of benches, a couple of lights where people can actually gather outside, I think that would be something to consider. I am for the amendment to the parking. I'm also for the density change to match to TOD1. I do agree with Councilmember Devine on maybe reducing the 25 feet for the trees and making sure that we have additional trees and just green and grass. And I think that's that.
Thank you. My other colleagues, Councilmember Najarian.
So let me just go back to one of the observations Ms. Asatryan was talking about. The Legendary has a locked-up public space. It's supposed to be open, and they've got those riot shutters on, right at the corner, pulled down. So that's no good. That's a violation of their development agreement. So I think we need to, someone get onto that. As well as the materials on their facade are cracked and fading. It's a crappy-looking building. And I think that's the same building Ms. Devine is talking about in terms of the signs covering the windows. So I don't know who's running that, but you should send them a reminder note that they have some obligations to fulfill.
Yeah.
Okay, that being said, now, everything you talked about regarding the density, let's say we incorporated the TD2 density in TD1, 100 units per acre. Now, if someone went SB 1818, does that give them additional density on top of that?
Yes, according to state law.
Okay, so I'm a little concerned about that. I like the idea of having more density, but I think we should assume that they're going to go for the SB 1818. So maybe going up to 100 right off the bat is too much. Give them a little bit less, factor in that they would do the SB 1818, and that would bring them up to around that 100 per acre. Because so many times we think, oh, 100, okay, we can, whatever the number is, we can envision that. And then the proposal comes in, and by the way, it's taller. And so these height limits would not restrict an SB 1818, right? You can go higher.
Correct.
The parking issue may be resolved by this bill. I'm not happy about that bill, by the way, because I think that in itself is a deterrent to creating affordable housing. Many developers would add the affordable housing to be relieved of some of the parking requirements that otherwise be imposed on them. So just as an aside, I'm not happy about that. I hope the governor does not sign it. With regard to the at-grade parking, are we talking about the possibility then of podium? I'm not sure if that's the correct term, but all parking and then the building up on stilts above it? When you say no, that means, is that not possible? Or are we talking about just a separate at-grade with the sky above them? What are we thinking about when you mention?
Thank you. That's a great question, Councilmember Najarian and councils. So the development standards include a maximum amount of the ground floor that can be devoted to parking. Okay. I believe there's an average of around 60% maximum of the ground floor, depending on what street frontage you have. So that would be allowed for parking. The remainder would have to be some sort of active ground floor use, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential, whether it's the back of house lobbies or whatnot. So you would not be able to have a building that is fully parking on the ground floor on stilts with the residential units up above. And as Mr. Calvert indicated as well, along the street frontage, you're going to have to wrap that building with some sort of active use. So with that maximum percentage of the ground floor that can be devoted to parking, with the screening requirement at the street level, we assume that that would be consistent with the intent of having a pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented type of development along the streets adjacent to the Glendale Transit Center.
So let's think of a smaller development, let's say on a 50 by 150 lot, which would otherwise be an apartment, multifamily units. I don't think that the at-grade parking would work in that situation because he's going to need most of the lot to create his 2 or 3 stories of building to fill in the units. There was a gentleman who used to come and complain quite a bit, and I forget his name, but we looked into his concern, saying that if I follow your development standards for these multifamily buildings, I can't have enough. What was his issue? Parking that would match the number of units. Do you remember that guy? Yeah. We followed his issues a little bit to try and figure out what was wrong. Is this sort of addressing that concern, or are we better off? Some of his concerns were setbacks, rear setback, side setback. Is it better to address it in that manner or permit on-grade parking where in the smaller type of development, it's just not going to happen anyway? I mean, I don't see many apartment buildings that have at-grade parking and a reasonable building above it.
Councilmember Najarian, you're correct. These changes are in response actually from some of those comments that we had heard, particularly that evening when he came to council. Some of it was open space comments, some of it was about parking. Part of the challenge that's there, if someone were allowed to build so many units, that parking is going to tip them into an area where they're probably going to have to do 2 levels of parking below grade. At that point, it does become very cost prohibitive. So in this case, what we've created is a situation where likely one level of parking below grade would be necessary, and then you'll have that partial above grade, which therefore, from a cost perspective, will allow that person to achieve the maximum allowable density. With the proposal, and this actually is kind of tailored to those exact kind of 50 by 150 lots, is that you would still have at the street frontage, the lobby, storefront, whatever it may be. So from the street perspective, it's not going to look any different than if all the levels were below grade. It just helps them get to their maximum density.
So I guess the only thing I'm really concerned about is if we do decide to bump up the density, that we're really looking at an additional 20%, right? Is that what we get for a concession for SB 1818? Density bonus?
At this point,
Is it-
it's between 30 and 50.
Yeah, it depends on the level of affordability.
Between 30 to 50%. So you could have potentially, who's calling the guru?
Is it?
Here she comes.
Is that Nubian, city attorney?
What could we be looking at? If we said, okay, 100 units per acre, standard, what could a SB 18 give us?
First of all, good afternoon, council members, Amir Kasakian. Councilmember Najarian, I don't have it memorized, but up to 50% is correct. The minimum is, I believe, 15%, or it could be 20%. I'm not 100% sure. But if it's within a half mile of a major transit stop, which I believe most of this area may be, there could be additional incentives depending on the level of affordability and additional parking reductions. So there's also that to keep in mind.
So I guess the point is, without getting the exact number, that if we look at 100 and we say, wow, I think that'll be just about right, it could be much higher than that if it's an SB 1818.
My point was only that there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of factors that could determine, but 50%, if it's a regular market rate project, but if it's 100% affordable, there is actually no limit on the density. But most projects are not going to be 100% affordable unless they're city-sponsored in some way.
Okay, just so we keep that in mind as we think about the details on this. That's my only point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Let me quickly go back to Councilmember Al-Satrian, want to add something, and then I'll let Councilmember Brotman.
Thank you. So I actually have 2 items. One is there something that we could do to preserve space as we're building out and putting in these new zoning codes for us to actually have space for public parks? Is that something that we could incorporate into this document where it states like a certain percentage has to be saved for public parks and open space, aside from what's included in the buildings?
I'll add a couple things, including the open space requirement that's there. That would require us to actually obtain property in order to be able to do that and ensure that it would actually be a park. The 10% requirement that you see there, Tropico is largely made up of really kind of these 2 ends of the spectrum in terms of property size. We have these kind of small 50 by 150 lots that were mentioned earlier, and we also have these very, very large sites. We anticipate that those very, very large sites are going to be the ones that provide us with that substantial open space. The percentage that was kind of calculated for this, the 10%, when that was modeled out for those large parcels, that does provide a pretty large amount of open space when you look at properties such as the Vaughn site. I believe there's a Bank of America site that's there. We would really be looking at those large sites being able to provide that for us.
And then second is how we design the actual streets. I don't know if that's something that's also could be incorporated into this. I'm looking at, like, for example, the North Brand project that we're doing, a demonstration project where you know, there's a bike lane, and then there's, then there's the parking, and then it's the sidewalk.
As you're aware, we are updating the bicycle transportation plan, so those kind of elements will be incorporated there, which then inform the ultimate street design and what goes into that outside of the kind of curb between curb space.
Councilmember Satrian, the public street improvements adjacent or in front of the private developments we have to create and approve a nexus. But with larger projects, we do condition the development so that they will pay, and in most cases, construct those public improvements in accordance with our bikeway master plan and complete street guidelines.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor Kasakian.
Thank you. Councilmember Brotman.
Okay. Thank you for this. Generally, I like the direction. I think you probably know I often refer to my Bible here, this book, Walkable City Rules, which I recommend everybody read. And I think you've hit on most of these points to get the kind of the walkability that we want. I'm good with the parking recommendation, having it at grade hidden. One thing interesting that somebody wrote in kind of concern about that is heat island, having open parking, and I wonder if we could somehow require that it be covered with solar or something, so that it's not just generating more heat. If you could think about that, whether that's something we could add, that there is a structure over that parking. Ideally with solar on it, but something there. I would be okay, and I think I've brought this up, before about parking minimums. I would be okay eliminating the parking minimums in the TOD, but I know that this bill is coming, and I believe that the bill through Senator Portantino, he negotiated in a 20% minimum affordable housing requirement. So if you go for that elimination of the parking minimum, if you want to go below, I think you need to provide affordable housing. I didn't know that. Yeah, I think he put that into the bill in the committee process. So let's see how that goes. But I won't formally request that now, because let's see what happens with that bill. But if for some reason that doesn't happen, I would like to put that on the table, that we think about further reducing our parking minimums. I mean, if we really want this to be an auto light environment, then that should be able to support, let the market decide how much parking. Now, if we do that, I think we need to think harder about, parking permits for the adjoining neighborhoods, because, there are those existing nearby neighborhoods, I think in Adams Hill, which are already, I think street parking is already very challenging. So we would have to figure that out. I am okay with the increased density in TOD2. I would like to see, you mentioned these travel demand measures, or there was some other term you used, that I think we've built into our requirements in the DSP. And I'd like to see if we can make those a little more substantial, because really this only works. This kind of density and this kind of low parking really only works if people are walking and biking and taking transit. And so I think we kind of need to kind of amp that up a little bit in terms of what we're expecting people to provide to reduce vehicle miles traveled and to get people using the transit more. And we're also going to need your continued help to make sure that we increase those headways on the Metrolink and just generally enhance the transit that's servicing that area, right? Because I'm all about reducing the parking and making it more walkable, but then people say, well, but we need the transit. The alternative isn't really at the quality that is required to make this work. So I think we really need to think about that. One thing I wanted to raise is minimum unit sizes. I don't know if that is something that, I didn't see that discussed anywhere. I know it's something I brought up a couple years ago when we were talking about DSP. because I think there really is a market for small units, and I think that might be a benefit to allow that, the market to meet, the developers to meet that market demand, and we get more units, and we get kind of naturally lower cost because they're smaller, right? Rather than kind of require this minimum 600 square feet that may be more than some people need. Let's see, so I want, so on the uses, I thought it was, I just kind of wanted to raise this. So we're prohibiting drive-throughs for fast food, I think, but not for banks and pharmacies. I don't understand why we're not prohibiting drive-throughs across the board in a TOD. It seems like drive-throughs are not appropriate. Now, I know we have that issue coming before us in general, so maybe we can park that, but I would like us to think about that. I don't think drive-throughs are appropriate at all there. We allow auto supply stores, but not garden supplies or electronics repair. So I would think these new buildings for people that are trying to go car-free or car-light, they might prefer gardening and using electronics more than they want to get their car repaired. So if we could think about that. And also, I'm a little uncomfortable about the idea of new sales, new auto sales uses and gas stations in the TOD. So I'll just put that out there. And then street trees, I do agree, I think it's really important. One of the things that in this book he talks about is making sure that you've got, trees that'll create a nice canopy, and they're kind of aligned on both sides of the street so they can eventually mature and create that, that kind of sense of enclosure and comfort. And also he does talk about, having like, on a particular street, you have like a certain species so that there's like a feeling of a theme to that street. You have a consistent species, and you want, obviously species that are going to be, that are going to support the future climate here and that are going to grow and give us that canopy. Let's see, what else do I have here? There's something about trees should be located 10 feet from the nearest crosswalk edge. Maybe you understand that better than I do, but I don't know what the theory is there.
Councilmember Brotman, it would be 10 feet from the nearest crosswalk intersection. So,
okay.
But we can get into that detail later on as well.
Okay. And then I would say, as far as the publicly accessible open space, yeah, I think that's good. One comment I got from somebody whose opinion I find always very enlightening is that he said that, modern examples rarely function as intended because people, whether it's the public or residents or commercial tenants, they don't use the public open space because there's confusion about whether it really is public. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you do about that. How do you make that publicly open space really something that's obviously for the public and so it gets used? That's your expertise. So I thought I'd mention that because I thought it was interesting. A couple more things. Hospitals, I don't know if you've been to a hospital lately. I just spent a bunch of time because I had some surgery a week and a half ago. But hospitals are incredibly, the way they're designed, they are so auto-dependent. I don't know if anybody has ever tried to walk into a hospital or tried to bike into a hospital. It is impossible. It is not designed for that. So I would like to think about how we can get hospitals to be thinking a little bit more about non-auto access. Better ground floor retail is another thing I want to mention. I think one of the things on Central that's frustrated all of us is that we're just not seeing the quality ground floor retail that we maybe expected. And that's going to be really important, right, for people to be able to access all the services they want without having to drive somewhere. So I don't know how you can ensure that we get quality ground floor retail, but I'll leave that with you. And then I would just say, in general, these kinds of guidelines are, only as good as how they're interpreted and enforced. We've heard about a couple enforcement issues. We want the best possible design. I think we want some of these, what is this firm that does great stuff in Pasadena, Mool and
Mulipolizoides.
Palazoides, like, how do we get like that kind of quality? Those kinds of developers coming in and building high quality stuff for us. Because I think that's what we all want. I think we're all like okay with going with the increased density in these areas, but I think we all also have been frustrated in the past that Glendale hasn't gotten the quality design that it deserves. So again, I know that's hard, just want to put that out there. That's what I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I want to also thank staff for this report and working hard on this. I won't repeat what my colleagues have said. I believe they all made very good points that I agree with. Everything from trees to making sure that the open space is more accessible. In terms of the one area where I want us to remain flexible is the frontage, the windows. For some, depending on what kind of a business goes in there, it may make sense, it may not. For instance, it was brought to my attention that if we have a grocery store on the first level, oftentimes a lot of grocery stores will have whether it's refrigerators, freezers, anything that's in the perimeters, that if they did put that up against those, it would be what people would be looking at, except for the fact that they may be able to cover the walls with something that would hide that from the fact that that's there. When I think of that, I think of, for instance, the dollar store. I think it's called the Dollar Store or King Dollar, one of those dollar stores on San Fernando, on the corner of San Fernando and Los Feliz, which does fine, and I think it's appropriate for the area. It definitely has done well, so it has stayed there for some time, including the CVS, and those necessarily don't have windows that people can fully look into the store to see what's up against the street. So I'd just like to have that be taken into consideration before we say it must be this. Oftentimes we have this desire to do something in a way, and it's well-intentioned, but it may not be practical for staff to implement when a certain type of use comes in and has other requirements. In terms of the upzoning or the conformity between zonings, and I want to commend you, Ms. Dematitis, for how kindly and effusively you suggested. I have not seen that kind of approach from staff in quite some time. You were so careful in saying it's yours, and I think that you have heard clearly from most of my colleagues as to their agreement as to having some type of conformity between the different types, the type 2s, the type 1. I would suggest that the one thing that I would like to see is that and I've said this a few times from this dais, I don't mind buildings being higher as long as we have more space on the street on the ground level. I like wide sidewalks. I think most people like wide sidewalks. When we all think of these types of cities we enjoy visiting and walking around, what makes them so enjoyable is those areas where there are wide sidewalks to walk down, as well as to have other types of uses incorporated, outdoor cafe type, al fresco, which we're now seeing is very popular and enjoyed by many. If there is there a way, and I would ask this to our city attorney and to our planning staff, where if someone decides to use a density bonus to go above and beyond what is the maximum allowable, then that we then tie that into a additional setback or require them to give up some more space so we have wider sidewalks. If they're going to build more units, then take more of the frontage and give it to the public.
Excuse me, Mayor, council members. Part of the challenge with that is they are allowed to ask for concessions and waivers. What I would consider and recommend is something similar to what we did with the downtown specific plan, is that we kind of have a tiered system. So if someone starts to escalate the amount of density up to a certain ceiling, then the ask in terms of open space starts to go up. Exactly under that premise that you brought up there, is that if you're going to have more density and allow more height, then there needs to be more open space at the ground level. We could bring back a modification to that, those development standards that does have a system that kind of mimics that, essentially an incentive system, if you will. If you want to achieve the maximum, let's say we change the 43 to 100, if you go to 100, now that open space requirement goes to 14%, 12%, something along those lines.
I guess the challenge for me, and I think for all of us in this, in studying this, is, you know, we say open space, we equate that with green space or accessible kind of passive use where people have benches or places where they can sit outdoors versus wide sidewalks. What I want to reverse the trend of in this city is those structures that we have, and I've seen this in downtown where, you know, because of a utility pole, because of a utility box, and the sidewalk is not even wide enough for two people to walk down the street shoulder to shoulder. You have to walk single file, sometimes even stepping off the curb, and God forbid you're in a wheelchair. Yes, Ms. Zimatitis.
Yes, Mayor Kasakian. The public realm standards specifically addressed two individuals walking shoulder to shoulder so that there is a 6-foot minimum sidewalk requirement to address that. Just to note also, the streets that we surveyed in the Tropico area, the existing curb face to property line varied from 7 to 12, in some cases 14 feet. And in this case, all new developments would have to provide a 15-foot curb face to property line that includes a landscape parkway, includes the 6-foot sidewalk and the building adjacent zone. So all new developments moving forward, and hopefully this area with these zoning standards is going to be redeveloped, revitalized, and we will be seeing wider public rights of way for sidewalks and outdoor dining and such. So that is the intention.
Thank you.
What I would add to that is that we could look at considerations for widening the sidewalk, whether that's reducing the building adjacent zone and keeping that 15 feet as kind of the standard, or if we really are going to look at potential increases in density, are there more opportunities to capture more? Maybe it becomes an 8-foot wide sidewalk, 10-foot wide sidewalk, really kind of depending on the street. That's another approach we can take as well.
Sure. Thank you. And again, I just want to say that I think that adding to the density or having the uniformity in the density in the areas that in the map that was shown kind of seemed like little carve-outs. It looked like it was around central Chevy Chase area. Makes sense only because if left as such, it becomes, I think, unrealistic to expect those areas to be developed given the rising cost of land in those parts of the city. I think that, you know, an acre in some parts of the city can go upwards of almost $10 million. You know, at that point, if you're going to build 100 units on an acre, you're already looking at about $100,000 just for the land cost. On top of that, I think construction costs are now about $350 a square foot, so another $350. We're looking, after everything's said and done, along with the impact fees, per unit, just the cost of construction is $500,000, right? And when we're looking at affordability in terms of housing and condominiums, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the median home price in Glendale was hovering around $500,000. Now it's completely out of reach of most families. You know, it would be interesting to see if there is opportunities to have condominium projects there, you know, what we can do to perhaps reduce maybe the impact fees, not completely do away with them because they're still an impact, but something that could possibly help people get their foot in the door into home ownership. And perhaps not at this meeting, and I know it's not related to this, but I want to put this out there to my colleagues for us to explore how we can encourage and help and support first-time home buyers to get their foot into the door, into the city, to set down roots and become parts of our community versus relying purely on communities that, you know, we keep hearing what percentage of the population are renters, and of course, we want to make sure that even renters have the opportunity to continue to stay in the communities that they want to live in. With that, those are more or less my comments in their totality. There will be, I'm sure, more moving forward, but I want to thank staff. With that, I'd like to ask if there is anyone on the dais that would like to move to receive this report. And I believe, staff, have you received enough direction from council? Is there anything that there are questions about that's hanging out there that perhaps you want to hear a second council member validate a point that was raised?
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian, or Mayor Kasakian. No, I believe staff has heard a number of comments that we will follow up in terms of trees and open space and publicly accessible open space. In terms of a density, I believe that we heard consensus that we would proceed with increasing the density to match the TOD1. In terms of minimum unit sizes, would it be up to City Council to consider perhaps reducing the minimum unit sizes for this area since it is in a high transit area? Or keep it the same with the citywide?
What are my colleagues' thoughts on this?
I would be open to that. I'm okay with that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So would council consider matching the unit sizes as in the DSP, or perhaps even considering going lower?
Well, if I might,
Councilmember Brotman.
the DSP is 600, right?
For senior housing, correct?
Just for senior? I thought 600 was across the board.
We would take a look at it. We can verify
remember we
that.
talked about this
We'll
2 years
verify that
ago.
and see, and we can perhaps bring back options for council to consider. Okay, so we'll do that.
Councilmember Najarian?
We had a mix. We voted on a mix of housing sizes, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, single. So it's not all 600 through the DSP.
It varies between singles, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and greater. The mix of units that are required would be part of the community tiered benefit system. But what we'll do is we'll bring back a series of options, whether to match the DSP minimum standards or perhaps even take a look at what industry standards are for smaller unit sizes.
Okay.
So, okay.
Yes, Councilmember
Could we,
Brotman.
just on that, could we take a look at the DSP as well? I mean, could you bring back an item if anybody else supports that, to look at these unit sizes broadly?
Of course.
That would need a second to come back.
I'll second that.
All right, there was a request and a second. I apologize, I did not ask our clerk, Clerk Abajan, do we have callers on this item?
We do not.
Okay, we do not have callers on this item. And also, there was some confusion from the public as I was trying to acknowledge my colleagues. There was some individuals that were trying to reach me by SMS and text. In terms of the noticing of this was noticed for 1 o'clock, correct? Because there was also the 3 p.m. On the posting or on the agenda. Can you give some clarification so people know why we heard this item when it was heard, City Attorney Garcia?
Sure. Mayor Kasakian, this item was noticed under the Brown Act as a special meeting, so it was noticed for 1 o'clock.
Okay.
And it's not a public hearing. When the items come back for adoption at some point, then that will be a public hearing that will occur in the evening.
Okay.
Due to a heavy load, I might add, we just don't put this at 1 to freeze people out. We've got a heck of a load, as you well know.
As we're running towards the end of the year, where there's a lot that we can get done. We also have had a cancellation of a meeting or a rescheduling of it because of a holiday. So those are the reasons why we're listening to some of these items in the afternoon. And I know that there's at least a few individuals here to be here in person and others that will call in. So with that, is there a motion to receive the report?
I'll move the item. Note, it's just a note and file, or
Note and file and take the council comments into.
okay.
to-
Note and file and take council direction. Yeah.
I'll second.
All right, may we have roll call, please?
Council members Asatrian,
Yes?
Brotman,
Yes.
Divine,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Kasakian.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Gulanian, can we, Clerk Abajan, can we please have item 2 read into the record?
Item 2, community development regarding presentation of results of hotel study related to hotel moratorium and direction on code/DSP amendments and/or extension of hotel moratorium for an additional 1-year period. A, motion to note and file report. B, motion providing direction and initiating zoning code and/or DSP amendments related to hotel uses in the DSP. C, motion directing staff to return with ordinance for introduction, extending ordinance number 5978 for an additional 1-year period.
Mr. Gulanian or Mr. Bradley?
By way of introduction, council members and Mayor Kasakian, the report that staff will be presenting include alternatives to the current hotel moratorium that was put in place, was directed by City Council This was in the Downtown Specific Plan, or DSP, and this was going to give staff the opportunity to conduct a study, a hotel demand study that will include a recap of the market and the demand, as I mentioned, and will also outline potential alternatives to the land use code and approval process within the DSP. With that, I'll turn it over to Bradley Calvert, our Assistant Director of Community Development, to present the report for your consideration.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, or good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. As highlighted, we are here to bring back information and seek direction regarding the current hotel moratorium in the Downtown Specific Plan. Just as an overview for this afternoon, we'll be discussing the hotel market study highlights. The market study was one of the requests the City Council had to kind of understand the appetite and the demand and capacity for more hotels within our Downtown Specific Plan. We'll be looking for specific direction on how to move forward with that, and that may include direction regarding the extension of the moratorium, depending on Council's direction from the other items that we'll be discussing. Just as some background, on October 19th of 2021, there's an adoption of an interim ordinance prohibiting new hotel developments in the Downtown Specific Plan. That was extended on November 30th of that year for 10 months and 15 days for a total of 1 year. There were some projects that were exempt from this. Essentially, any project that had received at least a Stage 1 design review approval was given pipeline status, so those projects are still allowed to move forward. And what Council directed staff to do is conduct that hotel market study and then identify what are the potential changes that could be made to the land use code, the zoning code, and understand how modifications could be made that may be produce maybe more satisfactory results, if you will. Just a little background: 1,193 total hotel rooms in the Downtown Specific plan. You can see since 2012 there have been 414 rooms that have been built. There are another 215 that are anticipated. These are all part of the pipeline status projects. We had a number of those that are either in the permitting process now or they've recently received a Stage 1 approval. Doesn't necessarily mean all of them will be built, but those are what are kind of anticipated. And you can see that mapped out: 137 rooms in 2023, potentially 78 in 2025. Some of the more recent hotels that have been built: the Hampton Inn at 315 South Brand, 94 rooms. The Hyatt Place, 173 rooms at 225 West Wilson. And the Residence Inn, 147 rooms on 199 North Louise. And that represents about 414 total rooms that have been built since about 2012 in the Downtown Specific Plan. Now, the market study, and I'm going to try to distill this down to kind of the basic, probably the most essential information that was identified there. Council had asked us to identify whether or not there was still a demand for hotels, what kind of demand may be there in light of those 400 and so rooms that have been built in the past 10 years or so. Right now, occupancy is down pre-post pandemic. It's about 65% right now. That's a pretty strong rebound from kind of the height of the pandemic, where it was getting down into the 40s. The market study did identify that there's an expectation that within the next 12 months or so, that 65% will start to get back up into the 80% range. And that's where we start to get much closer to kind of full capacity in terms of hotel rooms. What we are finding right now is that the average daily room rate is actually higher right now than it was even pre-pandemic. So even though there's not as high of occupancy, the average room rate has actually gone up. Total, there was identified as 13 different properties that were between a 2 and a 4-star rating within the city, with just under 1,700 total rooms. And as mentioned, there are another 537 that are in the pipeline based on that pipeline status that was given to some of the projects. Now, one of the things that this market study tried to do was identify where we were in comparison to surrounding cities, particularly Burbank and Pasadena. So just number of hotels in general, we are well below some of our peers. As you can see, Glendale there highlighted in the gold, Burbank up near 30 total hotels, Pasadena up near 40, us just under 15, 13 total actually. Now, room-wise, we are relatively comparable to Burbank. We're pretty close. Pasadena has obviously significant more than we do, closer to 2,500. But what this all kind of boils down to for us in terms of the city and the impacts of the kind of quantity of rooms and whether or not we're attracting regional tourists. And if you recall from the Economic Development Strategic Plan, there's a couple elements in there that did kind of revolve a bit around hotel space that's in the city, tourists that will come to the city. We do have a strategy there to attract tourists who are visiting Los Angeles, whether it's a day here or spending additional time, but also looking at that TOT revenue, the transient occupancy tax. And that is something that we do lag behind our peers pretty significantly in. You can see that we're just under $6 million in comparison, Burbank close to 10, Pasadena over 16. Essentially what that market study showed us is that Burbank, Pasadena, both with more hotels, more rooms, are essentially capitalizing on that TOT that we're not quite getting. And what that kind of ultimately resulted in was the market study identifying what kind of hotels do we need. What that market study kind of shows is that 65% of the hotel rooms in Glendale are lower quality or limited service. That should come with a caveat. When we say limited service, that does not mean it is not a good hotel. It is not a high quality hotel. It just doesn't have some of the extra amenities that maybe a higher end hotel would provide. So this is not necessarily being derogatory in any means to any existing hotels. We have very good hotels here, very high quality hotels, but we're missing some basic kind of amenity rich services, if you will. And that goes to the second bullet point, is that lack of meaningful event space, high quality catering, going to the third bullet point, spa services, or just being an amenity rich hotel. The idea behind that is that we become sort of a destination for people that may be visiting the region, whether it's Los Angeles or the Tri-Cities, that we're not providing those kind of services through our hotels that maybe attract those kind of guests. So really kind of boiling down to a limited number of higher end hotels. And again, when we say higher end, it's really more about that amenity rich element, having those kind of specific amenities. Another thing that the market study identified as an opportunity for potential boutique hotels. What they really kind of highlighted and cited there is a strategy in Palm Springs where they incentivize the rehabilitation of existing, maybe older hotels to be turned into something that's a little more boutique, something that may cater to a very specific clientele or audience. So those were kind of the two main missing pieces that were identified in that market study: amenity-rich hotels and the potential for boutique hotels. With that being said, what we tried to put together is essentially 4 alternatives around the land use code and direction we were seeking from City Council in response to those kind of major highlights from the market study, and just an understanding of where things are starting to go. We know that leisure travel is returning, business travel is starting to come back, and the expectation is that within a year or so, we should be back to that same occupancy level that we were prior to the pandemic. So those 4 alternatives include maintaining the existing zoning and incentive system. Right now, the way that the downtown specific plan is set up, hotel uses are considered a community benefit. That's really based on the premise that it's important to a thriving urban environment. The spillover effect to businesses, those staying in hotels, shop, dine, eat, spend time in our downtown, and that businesses benefit from that. In fact, their TOT from these hotels does make up 3.2% of our general fund resources. And as we kind of highlighted in prior slide and through our economic development strategic plan, there is potential for growth there. And right now there's currently a 12% tax on those rooms. Now the way this incentive system is set up is that there is a slight increase in density and building height that's allowed for any hotel that's going into the downtown specific plan that covenants for life. Making sure that use stays and that we're capitalizing on that full benefit of a hotel downtown if we're going to give that additional height and density. It's not a significant increase, but we have seen that it has been beneficial, helpful, and quite vital to a handful of those developments that have come through. So the first alternative is keeping that system. That would be any hotel that would come into this program, and doesn't matter what they provide in terms of amenities. There are certain conditions that we do have that they do provide some sort of public-facing, public benefit element. Maybe there's a meeting room or something accessible to the general public. But keeping that in place, keeping that existing kind of incentive system. The second would be looking at how we could potentially modify that incentive system. We look at what the market study told us, what it is that we may need, what we may be deficient on in terms of types of hotels, amenities. We could modify this incentive system to only provide the incentive to essentially what council may identify as a priority. If those are amenity-rich hotels, maybe defining what those amenities are, and then we offer that incentive to those type of hotels. Other hotels that are not providing them would still be an allowable use in downtown. They just would not be able to capitalize on that incentive system. So again, the example incentives applying to those hotels that maybe offer spa services, significant meeting space, or even the idea of the kind of boutique rehabilitation, though we probably won't see too much of that in downtown itself. The third alternative would be to change this from a by right or incentive use into a conditional use permit. What this really would do is allow council to apply specific conditions that are very contextually sensitive. Some of the comments that we heard in the prior meeting is traffic impacts, design impacts, the ability to provide maybe amenities and services that are open to the public, and being able to apply those specific conditions to each project. Now, with that being said, there is some redundancy built into that. A downtown specific plan project, a hotel, would have to go through 3 public meetings as is. They come to City Council for stage 1, they go to the Design Review Board as well, and then they come back to City Council for stage 2. All of those opportunities, or all of those meetings, actually present opportunities for council to start applying some of those conditions and feedback. So really, it doesn't change a whole lot from our current process, with the exception of they would have to go to a planning hearing officer meeting, or potentially a planning commission meeting as well. That would add on time to the process, potentially add on cost. And being that we're already going back to the Design Review Board now, if you recall, 18 months or so, we had changed that process so that downtown projects also go to the DRB. There are several kind of touch points where we can add in specific conditions to each project. And then the last would be to prohibit the use entirely in the downtown specific plan. No longer allowing new hotels to be built. This would be removed from the land use table. It should be known that this would obviously significantly impact any ability to continue to grow the transient occupancy tax within the city of Glendale. So those really are kind of the 4 land use alternatives that we were able to develop in terms of how we could move forward with allowing or not allowing hotels. Additionally, if council wishes, if there are other elements that you would desire for us to study or examine, you could extend this moratorium by another 12 months. What we would have to do is notice and return to council with that extension. So essentially the asks as part of this discussion are, if you do not wish to extend the moratorium, considering any of those 4 alternatives, or if there are any others that council wishes to pursue, or to provide direction and extend that moratorium for another 12 months. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Let me ask my colleagues. I know there's at least one caller, but I want to ask my colleagues if they have questions.
I have a couple questions.
Councilmember Brotman.
Thank you. Let's see. One question I have is, you mentioned with the current incentive program that they have to covenant for life that they'll operate a hotel. So what happens if a hotel goes out of business?
That carries with the land. So anybody who would buy the property from there on would have to continue to carry that out as a hotel, whether they tear that existing building down or build a new one. Either way, that property would have to be a hotel while it's in use.
But if the market, let's say the market really shifts against hotels and hotel goes out of business, what?
Similar to if we had a restaurant or any other use that happened to go out of business and no one had redeveloped the property, we would have a vacant building at that point.
Okay. And then the other question I have is just about kind of process. So if we were to say we wanted either, to enhance the conditions that go with these incentives, or not conditions, requirements that go with the incentives, or if we wanted to go down the path of a conditional use permit, we would have to extend the moratorium. I mean, you would need some time to do that, right?
I think it would depend on the scope of the changes. There is potential that we may need to extend. What we would like to do is, based on the feedback we receive here, reevaluate and see how much time that would take us to make any of those changes, and we may need to come back and ask for some sort of extension, yes.
Okay, so we could potentially do like a 3-month extension or a 6-month extension. I know.
Probably turn to the city attorney for a response on that.
I think that we would be required to extend it for the period required in the statute, which would be the 1 year, but you could always terminate it at the time that you adopt the new regulations.
I see. Okay. All right. Those are my questions. Thanks.
All right. Who else would like to chime in?
I have comments.
Councilmember Alsatrian.
So I am for extending it for us to potentially look at not just the conditional use permit, but also setting development agreements. Some of the things I would love for us to look at is not just incorporating the spot, which I wholeheartedly agree with on your market evaluation, but also looking at hotels that drive, Resort Pass, for example, has become a big thing in LA, where I think as the weather gets hotter, families and just residents and those traveling buy a resort pass for the day to use pool amenities and purchase day rooms. So looking at hotels that would kind of provide that as well, along with a nice mix of restaurants and bars that invite younger, hopefully travelers. I would love for our development agreements to look at how it's impacting housing, the type of amenities, and then as well as looking at local hires to benefit both our residents and our businesses. And I would like it to be extended if it's possible for us to come back sooner. I would prefer that over the 12-month period. That's all I have.
All right, Councilmember Devine?
Okay, thank you. Comments. I think we need to maintain the existing zoning, but modify the incentive system for additional density. So it's only allowed for these projects that meet the amenity needs identified in this study. I think the report was very revealing. And I've been reading about the rebound in hotel, those experiencing the hospitality systems, and it's getting better. It's rising. So I think we have to meet today's demand here in Glendale, and to induce that new demand from a broader region, we need to encourage a new hospitality type, as mentioned in the study, 4-star product. We do need event space. I think all of us know we've all been most of us have been in the nonprofit world and in the world of meetings and galas, et cetera, and we do need more conference space, event space, that's for sure. We do need that more interesting product, the boutique hotels. I think that's a great alternative. We need to adjust our composition towards a greater number of upper level rooms and the conversion of low price rooms towards to be more dynamic. And I also had some correspondence that in moving forward, we have to ensure, as I think Councilmember Satrin was mentioning, some of these to ensure community benefits. And a lot of them can be based on height and density. Make sure that they're LEED certified, maybe platinum, respect or have superior water conservation, meet certain transportation requirements, provide local hiring for sure. I know that, it's really important for us to look at the TOD, and that, this is an opportunity for the city to raise revenue. And I think we all have to look into the future to the sustainability of this city on so many different levels. And this is one way that we can work towards that sustainability. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we still only have one caller? Okay, Councilmember Najarian, your comments? You can take, if you're interested in hearing from the caller. I was going to give everyone an opportunity to speak. I didn't want to, I started out with Councilmember Alsatrian, and then I didn't want to go directly to the caller, but if you so desire, we can go to the caller.
We have one caller. It's Charlie Carnrow.
All right.
And Charlie, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Charlie Carno with Unite Here Local 11. I first want to thank Mayor and council members for their comments. The council made the right decision last year to pause hotel development in order to figure out how to have a robust approvals process for hotels to ensure that they truly benefit the city and its residents and workers. I note that the hotel recovery is ongoing. Average daily rate is still adjusted for inflation, significantly lower than it was prior to the pandemic in 2019. In fact, just a preliminary calculation that I did earlier this year based on inflation numbers that unfortunately have been exceeded suggests that based on the numbers you provide in the report, that it's about 11% lower adjusted for inflation. So we're still in the recovery stage. So as the industry continues the recovery, we continue to face a housing crisis. We urge you to adopt staff alternative 2C to extend the moratorium for another year and direct staff to come back with a range of mechanisms to regulate hotel development, including conditional permit as CUP has existed in San Francisco, and as we have proposed in Los Angeles as well. The city should also continue to discontinue the hotel use incentive and reserve height density and other incentives for housing development. The city needs mechanisms to ensure hotels provide real community benefits to the city and to ensure proposed hotel development does not negatively impact opportunities for residential development, traffic, social services, and the environment, and ensure win-win outcomes. This is much more comprehensive than the current design review procedure, where the use is not really something the city can specifically decline, nor does the current system allow the extent of consideration of impact on traffic, vehicle miles traveled, local hiring, programs to benefit small businesses, and just the impact of using our land for hotel use rather than housing. Requiring this to be memorialized in a development agreement would be even better and is consistent with requirements in the DSP that are often already memorialized in development agreements. As Councilmember Satrian and Devine noted, that could be as part of a tiered community benefit system, like Santa Monica's Downtown Community Plan, which requires a development agreement and a range of community benefits for commercial projects above a certain size. So we thank the council, hope the moratorium is extended while a more permanent mechanism of regulating hotel development is put in place, including study of a conditional use permit or development agreement process. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Najarian?
Well, so I voted for this moratorium, the initial one, because I was not sure if there was a demand for hotel rooms. I also voted for it because I wasn't sure how our quality of hotel rooms sized up with some of the surrounding municipalities. We have the answer. We are short hotel rooms, and the hotel rooms that we have are of lower quality than we really deserve. I'm not in favor of just extending this moratorium for another year. I think that would be a mistake. I am, however, supportive of going to a conditional use permit process where we can dictate certain development standards. And if I can point out one of the newest hotels, the Glenmark Hotel, I think all of us have been there in one form or another. That hotel met huge opposition 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and it was coming through. But what they have is a very well-managed establishment where there's a nice coffee shop down below. There's an art space in their lobby where they hold regular art exhibits and displays open to the public. And they have a very nice rooftop dining establishment which serves as a place for nonprofits to raise money, campaign events, celebrations, et cetera. And we've all been there, and it's very appropriate, I think. So if we could have that sort of control over and unfortunately, The one that's going in on the Burger King site, is it the Omni or the? Indigo. I don't think we built that into that. We were looking at mainly just the design features at that point. I think we did a good job on the design, but we were not able to get into the inside and really dictate what we wanted. So I would support going to the conditional use permit process where we can direct the developers to include many of those amenities. I mean, spa and all that, I'm not big on spas, but I think some of the more community-oriented spaces are more important to the residents. So I would support that. If you want to, I guess the action would have to be continue with the moratorium until such time as a conditional use permit process is brought back to us. I would support that. And I think we can really put our imprint on what's being put in as hotels that would benefit not just the travelers, but also the residents throughout the city as well. Thank you.
And I think what I'll say is pretty much consistent. I thought this report was good. It I think opened my eyes, and I do think we need to support more and better hotels, and we do need them for maintaining a vibrant economy and for the TOT and all the rest of it. So I definitely don't want to make it a prohibited use for sure. I don't want a very extended moratorium for a year. I think that would be a mistake because I don't want to hold off that long. But I agree. I think going to a CUP process, maybe with a development agreement. I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what these two things would do. But I would like staff to look at that. Yeah, CUP. To get some of the benefits that we've heard, the local hiring, maybe more rigor around traffic management and, encouraging, should I hold off? Things like programs so that the employees can get there without a car and things like that. I mean, I think there are a lot of things, and labor, yeah,
labor issues as well.
Right, local hiring I heard mentioned, and I agree with that. Yeah, and having these public uses, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the event spaces. So I think we're all on the same page. I would like to do that. I would just hope that we can do that relatively quickly and not make it take another year. But that's, I think basically consistent with what I've been hearing from the others.
Councilmember Devine?
Do we need the CUP process to do all of this? I mean, to get that council input, or is it already built in without the CUP process?
It's a very good question. And actually with the CUP process, that's not really going to give us quite the same opportunity to dictate these kind of very specific amenities or specific uses to go into that. If I can make a suggestion, I think what I'm hearing is that we want to get very specific uses or certain kinds of uses that are in there. We want to make sure there are community benefits to this. We want to make sure we can also guarantee that through a development agreement. My recommendation would be to go to the incentive system and modify there, and that you have to provide these kind of incentives or community benefits in order to get that incentive or the right to develop that project. And then to the point of the development agreement, that is something that whenever someone goes through the process, they do provide a development agreement in most cases. We can just make sure that that is something that is required going forward. That starts to get into some of these other things that are less about uses, less about amenities.
Okay, so because I keep reading that the CUP is redundant and keep, just repetitive. So if we don't, did you want to say something?
Yeah, if I could just add to that.
Ahead,
Again,
please.
the CUP is a requirement. It's a legislative determination that you think the use is appropriate in the zone, but you want to judge whether or not that use is in that particular location is a good use given what is surrounding it. That's different than what you've all been talking about this afternoon, which is these incentives, an incentive program, as Mr. Calvert identified, so that you can, in exchange for this incentive, the applicant would be required to provide the certain community benefits, which you've all identified this afternoon.
Okay, so the CUP would be really unnecessary?
I don't think it's
how
going
you
to
feel.
achieve the objectives that I'm
You're
gathering
hearing?
here.
Okay.
With the incentive system, and right now, even that system requires certain public benefits, right? We say things like meeting rooms or access to a pool or something. But we can go back and kind of retool that based on the comments and the feedback that we're hearing here. And I think when we're talking about things like a coffee shop at the street level, a lot of that can be addressed through our existing downtown specific plan where we require active uses, especially on particular streets. So I think we can get to all those through that incentive. And then we can look at requiring a development agreement as part of those projects because we do covenant for life on those.
Okay, then that would not lengthen the process for the developer. It would still give us the opportunity. So anyway, I just want to make that clear, and I'm for not extending this out as well.
I'll retract my comments on the CUP, and I'll go with the incentive program that we discussed.
Can I?
If I,
Yes, Councilmember Brotman?
I think Councilmember Satrian was in line first.
Go ahead.
If we went with alternative 2, how long will it take for you to come back with all the things that we're requesting?
I think if we have clear enough direction on what these kind of priority amenities are that you would like to see in this, that is something that we could probably bring back within the next 30 to 45 days to get council's buy-in and making sure that we're going on the right direction for those. Those modifications are more of a text change than anything. We're not talking about design and development standards. So.
What?
I probably just put some fear in a couple of my staff members' eyes, but we have. This isn't something that would be as heavy of a lift, I would say.
Sneaking up on
Yeah,
you.
probably.
So would my colleagues be open to?
If I could have one thing,
Yeah,
that
sure.
would mean that we would be concluded at the 30 and 45 day period, and hopefully she's looking at me with a little bit of sigh of relief.
she's
It'd be
nodding.
coming back to the city council to make sure that what we're proposing for the changes is acceptable, and then we'll finish out the rest of that
I
process
like that.
towards the end of this year.
Good.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I just
Councilmember
wanted
Brotman.
to add on this question of a CUP development agreement incentives. I'm really kind of a bit ambivalent because maybe I don't fully understand like what each would give us. But I mean, I guess the thing that troubles me sometimes is we get up here and we find that we don't have the control that we want to have or thought we had. That there are all these by right things and we're kind of boxed in. So that's the only thing I want us, these are important, developments, and I want to make sure that we do have a lot of control when it comes time to approving these. So I'll leave that, maybe when you come back, we can flesh out what the CUP gives us, the development agreement, maybe an enhanced set of incentives. But I just want to make that comment that's where I'm coming from. It's a place of feeling like we get stuck, we get cornered, and we don't have the control that we need to get the best product.
All right. So I echo what Councilmember Najarian said about the Glenmark Hotel. I think despite the worst fears of the community, it has certainly brought needed amenities to that part of the city, including the cafe and the art exhibitions that they have, and has been welcomed anchor to that part of brand. However, I think comparing, I'll say Glendale, and they have very good operators from what I've experienced and I understand, but comparing the hotel needs according to the chart of Glendale to Burbank, which has an airport, and Pasadena, which has the Rose Bowl and a number of museums and attractions, I think we're not, I don't believe that Glendale has the same type of hotel patron that those other cities do. Our hotel patrons, from anecdotally and from what has been presented, I believe, by staff in previous presentation, is more of a business traveler. And the fact is that when we look at the occupancy rates, we're still not where we were pre-COVID. We had about 80% occupancy roughly. We're at 60% or so, or 65, according to report. So we're still clawing our way back to where we needed to be pre-pandemic, along with the fact that we have still uncompleted or in pipeline hotel rooms, and that we're facing a housing crisis, I don't see the need for us to march full force forward with building more hotels when clearly the need is for housing, and we've been told that we need to build housing, and we're already a built-out city. And if we're going to have construction, anything that helps contribute to taking that albatross off from around our neck that the state has foisted upon us of 13,000 units through the regional housing need assessment is I think, more aligned with where we need to be as a council, as a community. I don't want to completely ban the use. I do think that there is a time and a need for it. I just think that the time and need for additional housing in a measured and appropriate way in this city outweighs the needs of people, these individuals that we imagine wanting to come to Glendale to stay in our hotels. Would I like to have nicer hotels in Glendale? Sure, I think we all would. But the fact is, even the hotels that we have now only have a 60% occupancy rate, or 65%, correct me to the correct figure. So I would be supportive of extending the moratorium as we continue to study this and come back with some more conditions as to how a hotel use is allowed in the downtown area. I understand that the temptation of having the transient occupancy tax revenue is great, but looking at the figure that compares the number of hotel rooms to our neighboring cities, I think we are exactly where we should be. Over time, that may change. In fact, by the way, there's also a new hotel that's being built on Colorado that's near completion. I think it's a Holiday Inn Express, so it's not like hotels are not being built in Glendale, maybe not in the downtown area, but I am fine with the 12-month moratorium extension. You can come back with more information, and perhaps then things may have changed. But again, I think that we're okay. So,
Okay.
who would like to propose something?
I'll make the motion to, if I may,
Sure.
make the motion to modify the existing incentives and not to extend the moratorium, but to bring back a report, staff report, as soon as possible on that item, modifying existing incentives.
May I ask for clarification just before we, not extending the moratorium?
Maybe,
Extending the
Councilman
moratorium.
Devine, you can break it up, and we can decide on the direction on what the zoning changes the council wants to initiate, and then the council can decide whether, because the moratorium is not on the agenda, it's whether just to provide us direction, to bring that moratorium ordinance back to you, extension ordinance back to you
Right.
in a couple of weeks.
Oh,
So
So modifying the existing incentive system is not the motion?
that is the motion, but the not
To-
moving forward with the moratorium is
Oh,
not part
okay.
of it.
Okay, so that would be the motion then, to modify the existing incentive system.
Councilmember Asadrian?
I'd like for us to consider the second alternative.
That's
How would that
the same, that is
That
the
is
second
the
motion.
It's the same.
The
Oh, is
motion
it?
is motion providing
Wait.
direction and initiating zoning code
You want
and/or
the
DSP amendments
extension.
related to hotel uses in the DSP pursuant to your direction.
Correct.
But no, I believe Councilmember Sargent's talking about alternative two.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at those, which is,
A
Modify
12-month,
existing incentive system.
So if we,
there's a 12-month moratorium extension.
Right.
if we,
Help us clarify as to what it is that,
sorry, I apologize, I was looking at the agenda. So yeah, those are two different
Provide
motions. So my suggestion was you break them up, you decide, you give us direction on the ordinance, the change to the DSP, and then take another motion on whether to give us direction to bring back the moratorium ordinance. But you can do it in one motion if you want.
so if we went with alternative 2,
Yeah?
all the comments we made today, and per staff, we would get them back sooner than the 12 months.
Correct.
Am I correct? So if we went with alternative 2, though it says 12 month, can we edit that now at the motion?
Yeah.
As we're making the motion?
I'm sorry, edit what? Well, just for the
The
record, council.
12 month moratorium extension, can we edit that part for the alternative 2? And
So
just provide
again,
direction for
I
additional
apologize.
study and return?
So, Councilmember Satrin, the ordinance, the state law governing moratorium says that second extension has to be 12 months. That's what the statute says. I don't know if it could be shorter, But my recommendation is to go with the 12 months if you want to extend it. And then when the council actually adopts the changes, it can then terminate the moratorium. That's my recommendation if you want to do the moratorium.
If I can make a suggestion, Mr. Mayor, City Council, with alternative 2, you can provide direction to staff to return within that 12-month moratorium. And then, as Mr. Garcia mentioned, at that point, you can terminate the moratorium.
So it would be alternative 2 in the staff report. Motion providing direction, initiating zoning code and/or DSP amendments related to hotel uses in the DSP.
Councilman Satrian is reading from the screen, and you're reading from
Right.
the agenda. Those are
Exactly.
those are two different things.
Right. Which
So
one
what
are we?
Councilman Satrian read is items 2 and 3 on the agenda,
Right.
and what you read was just item 2. So, Mr. Mayor, my suggestion
Oh, I
is
see.
Councilmember Devine made a motion. If there's a second for it, we'll move forward. If not, then somebody can make another motion.
May I ask, when does the current moratorium expire?
October 19th of this year.
Okay, so nothing's going to come back to us before October 19th, correct?
Probably not.
And if the moratorium expires, someone could slip in a application without any of these things that we're talking about and not be foreclosed from pursuing that.
Well, if I may, Councilman Najarian, so an applicant submitting an application after the moratorium is expired does not entitle them to anything. They would need to have all their entitlements and their building permit and incur expenses to not be subject to any new requirements. So I think I would add about the moratorium is that the council adopted in part because you wanted to make changes, but we had to wait till the hotel study was done, and we couldn't start the hotel study because we were still in COVID. So from that perspective, the moratorium was to sort of preserve the status quo until you can get this analysis. I'm not sure anybody's going to come in and slip an application in and be able to get it approved in a very short time frame like that. But if that is a concern, then yeah, our recommendation would be to extend the moratorium. Again, just by virtue of the fact of extending it for a year, it's not going to go for a year if once the council brings back those changes and makes changes to the code.
We should probably do that.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. And we need an amendment to you wanted two motions. So my motion would stand right now since we have a second, and then we can make a motion to extend for 12 months.
Councilmember Devine, I don't believe your motion included the moratorium. So there are 2 motions on the table right now.
I'm saying that then my motion would be just to modify the existing incentives. Then we could vote on that, and then someone
Okay.
could make the motion
All right.
to extend the moratorium. That would be a second motion. Am I right? Yeah.
That was my
Okay.
recommendation.
So
That is your recommendation, that is your motion.
it is.
You're doing it in 2 parts. Do we want to take that
My first motion is to
first motion? Yes. So do we want to take,
modify the existing incentives.
okay.
May
Councilmember
I ask
Brahman.
for a clarification
Sure,
and
absolutely.
maybe a friendly amendment? So I did want staff to come back and lay out a little more clearly what we do and don't get with just modifying the incentives versus, adding a CUP process, development agreement process. I would kind of like to see a little bit of a fuller set of options for us when they come back. That would, if you could modify your motion, then I think I would be good to go with that. Would that?
Sure, let me, before we do that, let me ask staff, what would be the difference? Can we resolve the question about what is the difference between the CUP versus the modified incentives question?
So the CUP is not going to give quite the same opportunity to influence what those specific uses would be in the spirit of what council has kind of commented here in terms of the amenities. I don't think it's something that we necessarily we would need to throw out. We could bring that back with us and highlight that a little bit better. And it does bring up the question of if we're modifying the incentive system, what about the hotels that are not using the incentive system? And I think that may be an opportunity where we can bring that comparison of the incentive system and the CUP, and maybe that CUP becomes applicable to those that are not participating in the incentive system. And that still gives council the opportunity to have some ability to dictate some of those contextually sensitive elements.
Okay, so I can include that in my report on the CUP process as well.
I'll
Okay.
second that if it hasn't been seconded.
I hope staff is clear on what it is that we're proposing and following this. There's been a
They
motion.
may be, but I
And
know
there's
that, yeah.
been a second. My understanding is that this motion includes the possibility of the CUP process.
Correct.
Okay, with that, let us,
What
yes.
would be the, I'm so sorry. I wanna make
No,
sure.
please,
Can you
ask, that's
please
fine.
clarify what we're voting for? Because I'm very unclear right now, so.
So from my understanding, it would be to take our existing incentive system, modify that based on the feedback we've heard from council, what the priority of those incentives should be, the amenities that should go into those, but also to bring back information regarding the CUP process, one, for comparison's sake, to understand the opportunity for council to have input on either one, which one kind of gets council to the objectives that you have, but also to consider the CUP process as part of those hotels that are not participating in the incentive system. We cannot require every hotel to participate in an incentive system necessarily. They could do it by right, and that's where the CUP process can come in and offer maybe some more opportunities for council to have input.
So this would allow us, the motion would allow us to have a CUP, but would also allow us to explore the modified incentives for hotels
That
outside.
would all
of
be
Correct.
contained in the report.
And
Coming
we can
back to
evaluate
staff.
that during that period of time and bring that back with a series of alternatives and see which of these kind of mix and match and would work.
Including the development agreement.
And the development agreement as well, yes, that would be part of that incentive system.
Okay.
Okay, so may we have roll call, please?
Sure. Council members Asatrian,
Yes?
Brotman,
Yes?
Divine,
Yes,
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Kasakian.
Yes.
and then I'll make the motion to extend the moratorium for 12 months.
There's a second?
And
There's
just to be clear, you're directing us to bring back the ordinance to extend the
Bring
moratorium
back,
for a year,
okay.
which
yeah,
we'll do on
okay.
the
Bring
27th.
back the ordinance to extend,
I'll
exactly.
second that.
Councilmember Najarian seconded it. Thank you. Let's have the roll call on that, please.
Council members Asatrian,
Yes.
Brotman,
Yes.
Divine,
Yes,
Najarian, Mayor Kasakian.
Yes. Now, there was one other item on this. That was a motion to note and file. Is that procedural? Do you want us to take a motion on noting and file?
We have direction.
Noting? All right, thank you very much. Let's have item 3 read into the record, please.
Yes, item 3, management services regarding REACH code building electrification. A motion providing direction on options to be included in a REACH code for building electrification, photovoltaic and electric vehicle charging to amend Title 24 of the California Building Code or adopt an amendment to the Glendale Municipal Code.
All right, Mr. Galanian.
Mayor Kasakian, members of City Council, we are excited to have reached this milestone today with the presentation that staff will be making regarding REACH code ordinance. We hired Rincon Consultants to assist in the preparation of a building electrification, photovoltaic, and electric vehicle charging REACH code ordinance based on analysis of several criteria and the best practices. There has been a number of proposed ordinance modifications that you will hear this afternoon and for your consideration, all in an effort to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions towards carbon neutrality and the City Council's vision and the direction in that manner. We have David Jones, who will make a part of the presentation, our Sustainability Officer, Daniel Scorza, our Chief Assistant General Manager, will have a part in the presentation because of the impact that these REACH code ordinance will have on our electric infrastructure, as well as our consultant, Rincon Consultants. Mr. Jones?
Good afternoon, City Council. It's a change to be here in the afternoon, so thank you for inviting us. Now, as the City Manager mentioned, we're here to present an overview of the recommendations that Rincon Consultants has gathered regarding REACH codes. They've looked across many different REACH codes in the state, identified best practices, and brought some of those best practices forward for us to consider today. And we're looking forward to obtaining your discussion and direction on how we should move forward with these proposed REACH codes. We feel that the REACH codes that have been presented by Rincon Consultants tonight are just that. They reach beyond the 2022 Energy Code mandatory requirements. And we also feel that the proposed REACH codes provide a great step toward our decarbonization goals in Glendale. We recognize that there is more to do, and the upcoming Climate Action Adaptation Planning Program will be an opportunity to set additional decarbonization goals. But we do feel this is a great start for us in that journey. I just want to spend 1 or 2 minutes before I introduce Rincon on the project timeline, because we're in a fairly tight time constraint. Believe it or not, we're already in September, 3 months until the end of the year. So with these REACH codes, I just want to, for clarification, just talk about the next steps. So we're going to ask for City Council direction on the REACH codes today, and they're going to incorporate that direction into a draft ordinance. Once we have that draft ordinance, we'll send that draft ordinance up to the California Energy Commission. And I just want to clarify something here. The California Building Standards Commission is responsible for overseeing the adoption, approval, and publications of the provisions in Title 24 of the California Code of Regulations. Title 24 of the California Code Regulations is the California Building Standards. Title 24 consists of 12 parts. Part 6 is the California Energy Code, and Part 11 is the California Green Building Standards Code, also known as Cal Green. The REACH codes that we are talking about today affect Part 6 and Part 12 of the Building Standards Code. Local amendments to Part 6, the California Energy Code, have to be submitted to the California Energy Commission for approval. This is a process where we'll send up our amendment to the local energy codes. The California Energy Council will put that amendment on their docket and they'll vote on it. And that's about a 2-month process. All local amendments to Title 24 have to be filed with the California Building Standards Commission. So we'll send up our recommendations to the California Building Standards Commission to make local amendments to Title 24. Once they receive our submission, they have a 1-month review process, and they will notify us once that review process is complete. At that stage, no other action is taken. And also for clarification, the submission to the California Energy Commission regarding Title VI does not have to be done in parallel to our submission to the Building Standards Commission, so we can send them both at the same time. So I just wanted to get that clarification about the time frame, because as I said, we have a lot to do between now and December. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rincon Consultants. Rincon will be helping us over the last 4 months, and they provided that recommendations of the REACH codes that we think are right for the City of Glendale, will help the City of Glendale in its decarbonization goals. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ryan Gardner from Rincon Consultants.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Gardner. I'm our Climate Action Program Manager at Rincon Consultants, and we've been working with David and actually several cities throughout the state on these REACH codes, kind of ramping up for this new 2022 to 24 code adoption. So just to start us off, a little background. David mentioned we're talking about REACH codes, so these codes go beyond the standard Title 24 California Building Code, of which you will be adopting the newest code, 2022, which will go into effect on January 1st of 2023. And this code gets updated every 3 years and gets progressively more, aggressive for the energy reductions that they call for, adding solar and things like that. And predominantly today, we're going to be talking about new construction only. So that is what is covered by those REACH codes. There are 3 REACH codes that we'll go into more detail about. The first is all-electric new construction. This would be covering every building type, and those would be built without natural gas infrastructure. There would be an infeasibility waiver associated with that, which would allow you to bring in new natural gas end uses for particular process loads if it was determined to be infeasible. We can talk a little bit more about what that means. The second is expanding the solar photovoltaic requirement to require 50% energy offset or 50% of total roof space for new non-residential buildings. And then thirdly, looking at adopting the Cal Green Tier 2 voluntary standards for EV charging. And we'll get into each one of these in more detail and talk about what it means and how it's different from the new base code. To give a little bit more background on why we're proposing these codes and why they're important, there's really two driving state legislation at this time that is calling for greenhouse gas reductions. The first is SB 32 or Senate Bill 32. That's calling for a 40% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030. That's codified. And the second is Executive Order B 5518, which is calling for carbon neutrality by 2045. So that's essentially net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Another important bill to keep in mind is SB 100 or Senate Bill 100. That is calling for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045. And this means that anything that we move from gasoline or diesel or natural gas to electric will be carbon-free by 2045 as well. And it's really important to remember when we're talking about these carbon neutrality goals. And then recently, we also have the Advanced Clean Cars 2, Executive Order N2920, which is banning the sale of internal combustion engines for passenger vehicles by 2035. We're expecting this to really increase the amount of EVs sold in California and the need for charging. When we look at where greenhouse gas emissions come from in the city of Glendale, this is from 2015, so a little outdated, but essentially what we see throughout California is about 50% of emissions come from transportation. So this is gasoline and diesel being burned in our cars. Another big chunk is coming from our buildings, natural gas and electricity, and the rest coming from waste and a few other sources like water and things like that. What's interesting on the building side is, again, because of SB 100, that big chunk of electricity at 28% will go to zero by itself by 2045 by law. And that proportion of emissions coming from natural gas is going to continue to grow. Previous to this 2015 inventory, we were showing a 2004 inventory, and it was about 10 or 20% higher electricity emissions. So that's already come down quite a bit just from 2004 to 2015. And again, that'll continue to come down to zero. So the first REACH code that we've been working on is the all-electric new construction. This will promote buildings that are built with no natural gas hookups. Appliances are predominantly heat pumps. So instead of creating heat, they just move it around. So they're 400, 500, 600% efficient, where with a gas hot water heater or HVAC, the most you can get is mid-90s. We're also talking about induction stoves, and then either heat pump or regular resistant heating dryers. So those are kind of the four technologies that we're promoting. This would cover all building types and detached ADUs, so things that are being built fresh. If it's being added to your home, in your garage or something like that, and you extend your gas line, that would be not covered. But there would be an infeasibility waiver for certain technical end uses, like if you want to have a brewery or a coffee roastery and there's just not a technology to cover that, you'd have this infeasibility waiver to continue to move those projects through. Talked a little bit about the equipment, but heating and cooling through heat pumps, these are great because if you run them forward, they provide heat, and if you run them backwards, they provide cooling. So you get both heating and cooling with one unit. That actually saves money compared to having an air conditioner and a furnace. Heat pump water heaters, really efficient. Induction cooking is really great to cook on. It's competitive with natural gas. It's kind of the big hang up we hear all the time. But induction is really good, and people are starting to pick that up. And then clothes drying, kind of either or, heat pump or regular resistance heating. So the new Title 24 2022 code has gone a long way to promote all electric buildings, but doesn't go quite so far as to require all electric buildings. What they've done for residential is require all buildings to be all electric ready and to either install a heat pump water heater or heat pump space heating, but gas is still allowed. So what we'll show in in the next slide is this actually reduces the cost by going all electric, because the base building is all electric plus you're adding gas. So if you don't install that gas, your building is going to cost less. On the non-residential side, it's really similar. It's all electric ready again, and then heat pump for HVAC or water heating. Depending on the building type, there's some nuance there. Gas is still allowed. And another important part here is that the prescriptive building, so in the building code, you can either build to a specific set of requirements, or you can demonstrate that you're meeting the performance goals of that prescriptive set through some other means. So the prescriptive building is all electric with heat pumps, with solar, and with batteries. So it's a really efficient building. So you have to go a long way to get to that same place with gas. So instead of doing all that, we're proposing to just have all electric buildings. And this is going to kind of preempt future code, making sure you're future-proofing your buildings, saving money up front, and allowing you to have carbon-free buildings by 2045. Talk a little bit about costs. Here they are in a little bit more detail. This is based off the local codes and standards, statewide cost effectiveness studies that get done based on normal prototype buildings. And we can see is across the board, significant upfront savings. And for most buildings, annual on-bill savings. There is a few places like the residential and hotel buildings where it looks like there's a bit of an on-bill cost associated with all electric building. There's two things going on here. One is that the local codes and standards can't model heat pumps to demonstrate cost effectiveness. So they use really low efficiency resistance heating to do so. And that's because they can't preempt federal appliance standards. So the costs are going to be high because they're using inefficient technology. In the real world, they expect people to build with heat pumps in order to meet that prescriptive building requirement. And then if you add a little bit of solar, you still get upfront savings and you get a ton of on-bill savings as well. So, and all residential buildings in this new code are going to have to be solar anyway. So if you expand that a little bit, you get this kind of win-win situation where you're just saving money across the board. Some of the other benefits with this all-electric building requirement is cleaner indoor air. Studies have shown a direct link of burning fossil fuels indoors with asthma, childhood asthma, health problems, a majority of NOx emissions, which turn into pollutants, come from buildings, not from power plants, as you might expect, because there's no emissions controls on your stove or your hot water heater. It's just combusting gas indoors. It's less expensive to build, and we're actually expecting to see natural gas prices increase nearly exponentially through the end of 2050 and beyond, because less gas is being built. Most of the cost of the therm of natural gas is to pay for infrastructure. Same amount of infrastructure is in the ground being paid for, less gas is being sold, so the price of the gas that is being sold has to go up, and we're already starting to see gas rates increase faster than electricity rates. And again, this is going to be really key for meeting the long-term greenhouse gas reduction targets, especially carbon neutrality in the long term. So this is really going to be the foundation for that. Onto the PV side, this covers non-residential buildings only, because single-family and low-rise multifamily buildings already have to have solar by code. So this would just extend this to all the other building types. And we're recommending going with a either-or approach, where buildings can either offset 50% of their projected electricity use or use 50% of their roof space, whichever is less.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Councilmember Brotman.
What are the requirements now for single-family residents in terms of that 50-50 formula?
So I don't have off the top of my head exactly what is required for residential single family. It's not a 50-50, it's a set amount, and it's based off of square footage, and there's like a calculation you do, but there's a mandatory some size of solar that goes into that for single-family residential. And this 50/50 would only go to cover non-residential, which right now needs to be solar. The base code requires you to be solar ready. So there's conduit, panel capacity. This would go beyond that and say, you're already solar ready, just put on some solar to offset some of your electricity demand.
Okay, so if I wanted to be able to compare how stringent or demanding this what we're talking about here is doing compared to single family,
it's kind of apples and oranges, yeah. It's not, the way they calculate it is a different equation, I guess.
Okay.
As far as the code. And we could get back to you with kind of specifically how that is. I can't recall off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, and the idea is that with the 50/50, if you have a really tall, narrow building that has a lot of electricity demand, you're not going to be able to meet all of that building's demand with a solar array, even if you cover the whole roof. And you also have other things that need to go on the roof, vents, package HVAC units, those types of things. So this 50/50 approach allows you to right-size the system for the building. Say if you have like a really big flat warehouse that's not going to use a ton of electricity, we also don't want to cover that entire thing with solar because they'll be overproducing and that can have issues on the grid. It's not cost effective. They're essentially just giving away power. So this allows you to kind of make sure we're not overproducing, make sure we're not oversizing the system for what's feasible. And the math works out great for cost effectiveness. When you pair this with an all-electric building, you get significant savings up front, and you get significant on-bill savings. So from a cost perspective, there's no reason to do this, or no reason not to do this. And this is with a 3 kilowatt system, so the math would be slightly different, and we have some additional studies being done right now to prove this out, because this is one that this code will have to go to CEC as we mentioned, to get verified and go through the cost-effectiveness study and all that. Benefits, we all know renewable energy is really helpful. It's also going to help balance out the grid. The the prescriptive requirements for non-residential buildings actually include battery storage now. So a lot more buildings you're going to see with some battery storage, and it's battery ready. So that'll be able to tie in with the solar and give us some resiliency benefits, help balance out the grid a little bit. And we just see these really large cost savings, as well as the greenhouse gas reduction benefits. Okay, now we're going to go into EVs.
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Robin.
EVs. Did we look at a battery storage requirement?
We did not.
Okay, is there a reason why we didn't?
We did not put that in the original scope of work because we had to keep it under the 50,000. So we just wanted to look at PV requirements, EV requirements, and building electrification, and understanding that in the 2022 code there would be more battery requirements for new construction anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so on the EV side, there are a lot of terms that fly around in here, so we're going to try to define some of them. And what's even more confusing is that the code uses different definitions for some of these terms than you might have heard before. So just so we're all on the same page, we're going to talk about EV capable spaces. This is a parking space with conduit going to it, so a tube in the ground, and then panel capacity, no wiring, and no EV charging, and it's really meant to be something that can be added to later, and you can just run the cables when you need it and put the charging station in. The next step up is electric vehicle ready spaces. This is panel capacity, conduit, wiring, and a receptacle, which is this thing on the left, like where you can plug in a cord to. And then finally, we have EVSE, or electric vehicle supply equipment. And that is an actual charger with the cables and the plug and that whole thing. So there's kind of 3 levels here. And there's also high power and low power EVSE. So one can, even within level 2, You can have different amperages, and there's some benefits and drawbacks to each of those based on speed of charging and grid capacity. We'll also talk a little bit about level 1 charging and level 2 charging. Level 1 charging is just a basic 120 outlet, 15 to 20 amp breaker. It's just a plug that you can plug your car into. It's really straightforward. It takes a long time to charge, but it's great for charging overnight. You can get mostly a full charge, when you're parked at home. So this is good for a backup, or if you have 2 EVs at home. And then level 2 charging is much faster. 40 to 100 amp breakers, 240 volt panel capacity, and that can be, full charge or 80% charge in 3 or 4 hours. And this is better for when you need more charging.
I just have a very quick question. If you are electric vehicle capable, does it matter which one of these you?
So electric vehicle capable, what's nice about that is you can put in anything you want later.
That's what I want to know. Thank you.
All right. So getting into our code, we're recommending the Cal Green Tier 2 standard. So just a little background, the electric vehicle charging requirements that are in the 2022 code are designed to meet the projected EV demand through 2025, so just 3 years from now. We know that when we build a building, it's going to last for a lot more than 3 years. We're talking 50 plus, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting closer to the amount of charging that we think we're going to need over the long term. In general, the Cal Green Tier 2 voluntary requirement ups that about double. So we're going out to more like 2030 levels of EV charging, maybe a little beyond. So we're looking at, for 1 and 2 family homes, we're taking the mandatory level 2 EV ready space and we're adding another level 1 charger so that if you do have a family with 2 EVs, you could charge both of them. For multifamily, we're going up from about 25% EV ready to 40% EV ready. And if that's for less than 20 units, and if you're more than 20 units, 15% of those 40 need to be level 2 EVSE. So you'll have a mix of EV ready with the conduit or outlet, and then 15% of those actually with chargers. On the non-residential side, so sorry, that was for multifamily and hotels and motels. On the non-residential side, it's a little more complicated. It depends on the number of spaces you have, but this is kind of the level of EV capable and EVSE spaces depending on the size of your parking lot that you're providing. And it goes from 3 EV capable spaces up to 45% of the total. And I have a slide in a second that kind of shows the change between the two. But again, we kind of went through this. We go from 10% EV capable and 25% EV ready to 40% EV ready. So that ups that for multifamily, adding that level 1 circuitry for low-rise residential, and adding the higher number of EVSE to the larger hotel motels. And then on the non-residential side, it about doubles all these requirements. So if you have 0 to 9 parking spaces, it goes from 0 to 3, so at least you have something, and then up from there, about doubling throughout. The benefits, beyond greenhouse gas reductions, we're also getting air quality benefits. We're also preparing for this new surge of EVs that we expect to see over time, especially leading up to 2035. And it's a lot less expensive to install these now than it is later. So a couple of studies that have been done, more up north, but relatively similar construction costs. We're looking at about $850 a space, or $900 a space to add conduit and panel capacity now, and more like $4,000 to $5,000 to add that capacity later. So this is going to help save money over the long term, and sometimes it's not even feasible to add these spaces after, especially if you're working with like pre-stressed concrete and things like that. So this is really just going to help future-proof some of these buildings and make sure we're providing that capacity. That's it for me.
Great, thank you very much, Ryan. We've also done a fair bit of outreach regarding these reach codes to the community. We've developed a website on the city's website that has all the information contained from the Rincon memorandum talking about the proposed reach codes for the city. And also on that website, there's the opportunity for people to provide feedback and comment to us on the proposed reach codes. So far, we've received 24 responses to that survey, most of them positive in wanting the city to pursue these types of reach codes. We've also undertaken 2 workshops. We had a professionals workshop that took place in the afternoon of September 8th, and that was to bring the professional community, the developers, the HVAC technicians together and to get their response and their feedback into the potential reach codes. Then also we had a wider community workshop at 6 p.m. in the evening of September 8th to allow the community to comment on the reach codes and get some of their feedback. And then we've also posted all this information on the city's website so people can go back and review those meetings and look at the webinars and everything. So we're fairly proud of the extensive outreach we've done this. And obviously it just doesn't stop there. We'll continue to do outreach, continue to drive people to the website as we continue to go through this process. We just want to end up a little bit on some issues for consideration as City Council looks at these reach codes. As the drive towards electrification gathers pace, there will be greater demand on electric utilities going forward. And we're going to have to respond to that demand. We're going to have to respond to that greater demand in investing in our infrastructure. And now I'm going to ask Mr. Dan Scorza to come up and talk about some of these concerns that GWP has brought to our attention.
Good afternoon, Mayor Kasakian and council members. It was a pleasure working with David and our consultants that we hired for the city. We just had some concerns as we went through the electrification codes that we just need to be aware. One of the things, I think the previous slide, maybe if we go back. Yeah, so basically the utility becomes the refinery, the gas station, the gas company. We're being put in that position. One of the things we looked at as a utility is that the anticipated electrification of buildings and transportation will eventually double GWP's load in the next 10 to 20 years. You know, as we move forward, transportation, building gathers pace, infrastructure has to be built. One of the questions I was going to ask the council and staff is, you know, the current cars that are out there, for example, a Model 3 Tesla has a 60 kilowatt hour battery. A Model S has a 100 kilowatt hour battery. I think the Rivian, that's the pickup truck, 125 kilowatts. The F-150 Lightning with the bigger battery, 130 kilowatts. So these are substantial, large electrical devices that need electricity to be put into them. You know, so the infrastructure has to be built to provide that. The other thing is municipal utilities will be associated with the REACH codes and expectations for assistance and services. I've gotten calls from customers who have existing buildings and they would like to add EV charging. And that's happened where, you know, they get a quote from us and they're a little bit surprised. Why is it that much to do this? Because we have to put underground substructures in their properties, a vault, a transformer, and then a second service to feed these level 2 chargers that they were looking for. So it is a substantial amount in that sense, but we're not dealing with that in this case. This is new construction, and I understand that. And then, you know, staffing needs for not just the utility, but the city. You know, permitting is going to go up. The maintenance, as eventually I said, the load will double. So, and our infrastructure will double. So we'll need staff appropriate to do that. And so I just had just some points here. So GWP is all for having building electrification, photovoltaic infrastructure, electric vehicle charging, building codes to ensure that society transitions to more efficient using of energy in everyday tasks and functions. Electric utilities have been given the task of solving climate change by electrifying society. GWP is up for the challenge. Electrical energy production, generation, transmission, distribution is the most efficient way of moving energy into our transportation sector, into our homes, buildings, and leads to the most reduction in greenhouse gases. In most cases, the efficiency numbers for electrical infrastructure, as our consultant was talking, and it's true for the utility side, electric infrastructure is 90% plus efficient. Our transformers, our transmission lines, our distribution lines, our inverters are 90+% efficient. That's why electric vehicles get the equivalent to 100 miles to the gallon. And also, electrification's transportation sector will eliminate 50% of all CO2 emissions in California that contribute to climate change. So it is a solution there. But again, as I said, GWP believes that load will grow 50 to 100%. That's double the load to about 500 megawatts in the next 10 to 20 years. The largest drivers will be the EV chargers, the level 2. And I don't know if you know what a level 2 charger is we discussed there. It's about 6 kilowatts. It puts 6 kilowatts load. And level 3, which we didn't talk about here, are getting much bigger. Originally, there were 50 kilowatts. Right now, I think we're looking at the bus chargers at our fleet transit systems. They're at 150 kilowatts each. So the loads are going up. So as I said before, GWP will be the refinery, the gas station, the gas company, with the expectation that services will be available 100% of the time. And with the current resources and staffing, we won't be there. So each charger, level 2 charger, consumes 6 kilowatts. Now, as I said, 6 kilowatts, that's just a number. Remember Tesla Model 3, 60 kilowatts. So if you were at 0, it would take you 10 hours to charge to 60 kilowatts. But remember this, 6 kilowatts is equivalent to putting a single family house on the grid. Our homes alone use 6 kilowatts. So each time I add a level 2 charger, it's like adding a house to the grid. I've had friends who come up to me, Dan, I'm sorry, I just doubled my load. And I'm going, what do you mean? Because my wife bought a second Tesla, and we both work, so we have to plug in 2 cars, and we're putting a second level 2 charger in there. And that's true. So they just doubled the load in their house. Actually tripled it, because their house is 6, and then they have 2 level 2 chargers, which add 12 kilowatts. So those are the numbers that concerns us, because as we add infrastructure on the customer side, on the utility side, I have to add the wires, the transformers, the infrastructure to meet that goal. So I could very easily imagine in the near future 1,000 level 3 chargers. They're about 250 kilowatts each. So 1,000 level 3 chargers, what would that be? It would be 40 supercharging sites with 25 chargers. I mean, that could happen. But just do the math. 250 kilowatts times 1,000 of those 250 is 250 megawatts of added load. Or let's look at the other side. There's about 50,000 households in Glendale. We have 90,000 meters plus, 90,000 plus meters. But let's say 50,000 households, and they add a level 2 charger. That's 50,000 times 6. That's 300 megawatts of more load. It'll probably be a combination, but those numbers aren't too far. Next 10 to 20 years, that's where we're going to be. So the question came up, EV ready. As customers add and electric panels grow, the utility can't wait. I'm looking at residents having 225 amp panels, 400 amp panels. Commercial industrial will even have larger electrical panels. I have to, as an electric utility, to add to the utility side distribution wires, the poles, the cross arms, the wires, the pole top transformers, underground conduits, cables, vaults, transformers, circuit breakers, 69 kV substations. These are all long lead items. It takes 10 years to plan, order, install equipment. And eventually our generation resources will have to double as well. So, just to give you the key issues. So key issues are electrification, infrastructure, load growth, addressing aging infrastructures. These are the generation distribution wires, as I spoke about. The work has to start now in the planning, engineering, maintenance, finance, rates, construction, customer service, permit, inspections. And then the second key issue would be staffing. GWP should be appropriately staffed to serve and maintain a double load of our system and double the infrastructure. Currently, we're trying to recruit electrical mechanics, and we're looking at all the positions, and including issues such as retention of personnel. So in closing, electric utilities have been given the task of solving climate change. By electrifying society, GWP is up for the challenge. Electrification of transportation sector eliminates 50% of all CO2 emissions in California. We support 100% electrification of Glendale, homes, buildings, and transportation. And, so with this, the issues are aging infrastructure, new generation, and necessary staffing to enable us 100% electrification of Glendale. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
There's so much information out there on REACH codes, so we encourage everybody to go to these websites to learn more as we go forward. And with that, we're open to respond to any questions City Council may have.
All right. I know we also have callers, and I know folks have been waiting on the phones. Let's hear from the callers, and then we'll have some questions from the council.
Okay, we have 6 callers currently.
All right.
We will begin with the first caller, whose name is Suyama Bothineake. I hope I did not mispronounce your name. You're on air. You may begin. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, City Council members. I am Suyama Bothineake, a design professional calling to strongly support the Building Electrification REACH Code, agenda item number 3. With the ongoing effects of climate change and the disproportionate impacts on vulnerable residents, such as our children and senior citizens, the task of decarbonizing new and existing buildings deserve the urgent attention and support of city policy and budgets. Electrification is a building decarbonization strategy that is readily available and cost-effective through efficient technology. The health benefits of improved indoor air quality from not burning fossil fuels on site would be welcomed in the community. Glendale has the opportunity to join over 50 other cities in California that have already passed REACH codes for building decarbonization. It should be a priority of the City Council to direct the necessary staff, the budget to support the passage of implementation of REACH codes to decarbonize new and existing buildings through electrification so that a major source of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions become carbon neutral. Additionally, the City of Glendale has the opportunity to take advantage of the significant funding that is going to be made available towards decarbonization in our communities. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act has set aside $670 million to support zero energy REACH codes and a further $8.575 billion in rebates for home energy efficiency and electrification. There are tax incentives for energy efficient residential and commercial improvements as well. Passing electrification REACH codes now would allow residents to take advantage of this funding and incentives, improve health outcomes, and take urgent steps to mitigate the major source of greenhouse gas emissions, the construction and operation of our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next caller is Kimberly Orb. Kimberly, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, Glendale City Council members. My name is Kimberly Orb. Can you all hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, my name is Kimberly Orbe. I'm the Sierra Club Conservation Program Manager with the Untitled Chapter. As someone who cares about climate and environmental justice, I strongly ask Glendale to move the adoption of an all-electric building code for new construction. As named in the presentation today, Southern California has some serious and criminal air pollution problems. Decarbonization of buildings is crucial to solving the region's air pollution and climate crisis. Glendale has a real responsibility and opportunity to act to ensure that cleaner air is available for all of its residents. Over 60 communities across California, with Pasadena being one of the most recent, have already adopted a local building electrification code. Others in the area include Los Angeles City, LA County, and the list continues to grow. To maximize the public benefit of the REACH code, I strongly recommend that the city really moves for an all-electric REACH code for all building types and uses, with an inaccessibility waiver that extends only to the uses where electric appliances are not available, and that requires a building to be electric ready to reduce the cost of future upgrades. I agree with the Sustainability Commission that waivers should be for physical accessibility, and I urge the city to adopt a REACH code that maintains this approach. Thank you all for your time and your leadership on this issue.
Thank you. Our next caller is Michael Rochums. I'm really sorry if I mispronounced your name. You're on air, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Michael Rochmus. I'm the volunteer chair of the Climate Reality Project LA Chapter Green Buildings Committee, and I'm a member of the Glendale Building Electrification Working Group. We're already facing extreme weather due to climate change, such as the recent extended heat wave. And so this is a very important measure, and I commend the city for undertaking the project. I think the proposal is very good. There's just a couple areas where I think it could be improved. I want to focus on building electrification. All electric buildings are more healthy, comfortable, and safe. They're also less expensive to construct and maintain. And given the need to transition away from fossil fuels, eventually we're going to need to upgrade all of our buildings to use efficient electric appliances instead of fossil fuels. So every new building built today with gas just extends the future burden to retrofit those buildings. So this REACH code is a great first step just by stopping making the problem bigger. It's going to save people a lot of money down the road by having people do things right the first time. The one thing that I think could make this proposal even stronger would be to include substantial remodels. When we say substantial remodels, I mean where a building is mostly torn down and rebuilt, not just like the kitchen, the whole building. So this happens a lot with houses when they're sold. Sometimes they're flipped. This is the most cost-effective time to make the transition to all electric. So again, you're saving people a lot of money if you require all electric at this phase. That said, I know the proposal doesn't include those, and I don't want to hold up the proposal. So I would recommend making sure that whatever moves forward is done this year, and that substantial remodels, if they're not added now, they can be added within the next year. And just very briefly on EVs, I think it's a little bit misleading to say that adding an electric car charger is like adding a new house, because at its peak load, it will draw that level of power, but people will only be charging their car once or twice a week. I think the vast majority of people who have 2 electric cars, for example, would be fine sharing one charger. So I definitely appreciate the work that GWP is doing, keeping Glendale running. And there's, we need a lot of infrastructure. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next caller is Jackie Eco. Jackie, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Go on.
Hi, I'm actually calling in support of the REACH code. As many of you may know, over 50 cities. Am I getting an echo? Are you okay?
You're fine.
Okay, I'm hearing
you
an
may
echo.
want to turn down the volume on if you're watching the meeting or if it's on.
I'm not, but I don't know what that is.
You sound just fine. We'll restart your time. Please go on.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so basically, one of my biggest concerns is that, we are in earthquake country,
And over 50 cities in California at this point are now banning gas in new buildings. And many of them are requiring solar panels. And I do very strongly feel that we should have solar panels pretty much on every roof, especially for people who want them, but there are financial considerations holding them back for one reason or another. So I feel that it's very important that we do everything we can as soon as possible. Should have been done really 20 years ago. But moving forward, I would like to also point out that we are currently at a what are they called? I apologize. They are saying that the right now is we have a 60% chance for Los Angeles to have an earthquake at a 6-point magnitude or higher. Let's say it even had an 8 magnitude. All of those, gas shut-off valves that are supposed to be automatic, they're not going to work because the gas lines are going to break completely. I know because I'm a property manager and I've spoken to like 6 different contractors about this. So it is extremely dangerous. As many of you know, the earthquakes aren't that bad. It is the buildings that are bad, the gas, the explosions, the fires, the horrific deaths and destruction. It's really, a lot of it is really unnecessary. So I can't emphasize enough for this, here we are in earthquake country. It's more important than anywhere else, perhaps, that we have electric only. No more gas. We have to do away with gas, at least in this state, for the most part. If we could do away with it in most places, we might be in a lot better shape. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is Kate Unger. Kate, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Kate Unger with Glendale Environmental Coalition and the Glendale Building Electrification Working Group. And I've been advocating for REACH codes for building electrification and solar since 2020 here in Glendale, so this is an exciting moment. I wanted to start by commending staff and the consultant for their work. In particular, I wanted to thank David Jones for his leadership of the project and his efforts to keep things moving forward on this fast pace. As he said, there's a lot to accomplish in a short time to have these codes in place in January. It's great work that they're doing, and I'd also like to thank him for his openness to taking input from our group. A group of several organizations came together to submit a joint letter with comments on the proposal and recommendations to strengthen it, and I hope you all had a chance to look at that. The end of that letter summarized the recommendations in a way we hope is clear and compelling, so I will stand on that and move on. Though not mentioned in our letter, we would completely agree with increasing the solar PV standards if council wanted to do that. And we would also be very open to the upcoming work we're recommending related to substantial remodels, being accompanied by investigation of adding REACH code standards for battery storage. So this set of REACH codes is estimated to affect a very small portion of Glendale's built environment. As you saw in the staff report, the number of permitted buildings in 2021 to 22 was under 200. The vast majority of those are itty-bitty ADUs. So even if that doubles, we're talking about 400 new buildings. So this is a very modest measure. I really appreciated hearing GWP's perspective on future electrification in Glendale and their support for it. Great to hear. As Mr. Scorza said, that's not what's at issue today, but we are very game to work with staff on next steps to encourage Glendale residents and business owners to electrify their buildings and vehicles. And I'm confident that the city can embrace all the new technology that can manage demand and mitigate peak impact. Also keep in mind, the more solar we put on our local buildings, the less the concerns raised by Mr. Scorza will actually impact Glendale. Smart inverters offer so much functionality to dynamically respond to grid conditions and avoid circuit overload. So again, that's future concerns, but it's important to be thinking about them now, as GWP smartly is. And in closing, I would just like to echo this is a win-win for the city, for developers, and for residents of future buildings here. And I would really like to thank you all for embracing Glendale being a leader in electrification in the Southern California region. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Our next caller is Simone Barth. Simone, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of City Council. My name is Simone Barth. I'm an architect and a steering committee member of the AIA California Climate Action Committee. We applaud the City Council and city staff on addressing this important topic, and on behalf of the residents and business owners of Glendale. I'm working for a 200-person design firm with offices in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And we have designed over a dozen all-electric buildings and found them to be cost-effective and robust solutions for our clients. We realize that the time for action is now. You will join over 50 municipalities in California that adopt a REACH code. I support and encourage the motion for an adoption by the City Council of the REACH code electrification, PV infrastructure, and EV charging infrastructure via amending Title 24 or by city ordinance. Thank you very much for being a leader in this, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Our final caller is Catherine Yerka. Catherine, you're on air. You have 3 minutes.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking my call, Mayor Kazaki and members of City Council. I'm very excited to see the REACH code before you today, and I'm grateful to everyone who worked on this. The Sustainability Commission's recommendation was that 100% of parking spaces in new multifamily buildings be electric vehicle ready, given the state's EV mandates and the expense of retrofitting spaces later on. I confess to missing a portion of staff's presentation today, but it was my impression that what staff are proposing to you is far less than 100%, which the commission rejected. And so I'm not entirely sure, but I hope you would consider what your commissioners recommended regarding full EV-ready parking spaces. I also wanted to highlight the Sustainability Commission's recommendation that efforts to add existing buildings to the REACH code requirements during major remodels begin in 2023 and are implemented, if possible, by 2024. GWP's concerns suggest why battery storage needs to be part of the equation, not today, but as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your consideration and work on this. Bye.
Thank you. All right. We've heard from callers. We won't be taking any additional callers on this item. I think everyone had an ample opportunity to be heard. I'd like to now ask my colleagues if anyone has any questions, any comments.
Okay.
All right, Councilmember Brotman.
A few questions. Let's see. Number one, on the infeasibility waiver process, can you talk a little bit more about what we would consider something being infeasible and to what extent economic considerations would be included?
Yeah, there's some opportunity to kind of flesh that out and talk through it. So some cities have only included a technological infeasibility. So there's just, we need a coffee roaster and there's no coffee roaster that is this size. So that's a technical infeasibility. But something along the lines of this electric water heater is more expensive than a gas one would not be. But I've also seen cities add a percentage of total project cost and have a financial infeasibility as well. So there's some options and some space to talk through that and kind of get direction from council on what they'd like to see.
Okay. Another question I had, on the solar requirement. So I know we're saying the lesser of 50% of energy offset or 50% of roof space. And I get the 50% of roof space because I know there are other things that people have to put on these roofs and all that, and not all of it is going to be, is going to be ideal for solar. So I understand that 50%. I don't understand the other 50% because if somebody is able within that 50% requirement to offset 100% of their use, we want that, right? And so, but under what we're saying here, somebody could come and say, well, 50% of my roof, I can offset 100, but I'm going to choose to just do half of that. So why would we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to say 100% or 100% of offset or 50% of roof space, the lesser of the two, and just go with that?
Yeah, so the main reason is that electricity consumption happens over a 24-hour period and solar generation happens over an 8-hour, 10-hour period. So we want to make sure that we're not putting this big solar array that's supposed to meet the whole demand for 24 hours on a building when it's only going to be generating for 8. So it'll be overproducing for those 8 hours and putting power out to the grid, which could be a financial loss, depending on, and I apologize, I don't know the net metering ins and outs of Glendale Water and Power, but generally, when you put a kilowatt out to the grid, now you get less than what it takes to pull it back in. So if you're overproducing, you'd be losing some money, and there'd be grid impacts associated with that. So we felt like this middle-sized system would ensure we weren't overproducing, kind of getting us to the sweet spot to maximize that benefit. And I think individual buildings would be able to, upsize from there. This kind of just gets them started and make sure we have a system that's not, have a system at all beyond code. So that's the reasoning behind that.
Okay, well, maybe I'll hold to my comments because I disagree with that, and I think it doesn't make sense to go less than 100.
Okay. Who else would like to ask some questions? Well, while some of my colleagues may be thinking of what they want to say, I want to know what percentage of the greenhouse gas emissions, do we know what percentage are from commercial versus what percentage is produced from residential?
Mayor Kasakian, I don't have that data on me right now, but we do have that data, and I can provide you that data.
Yeah, I would like that information, please. Councilmember Najarian?
I have a question of Dan or Mark from GWP. Hi, Mark. So Dan told us that you expect power demand to double in the next 10 years. What assumptions are you using? What profile or forecasting model are you using to get to that? Because that's a shocking figure to me.
Yeah.
I don't know about anyone else.
Yes,
we
sir.
barely made it through this week. And not just the city's possible increased demand from the REACH code, but the state's demand on the requirement on the EVs that have to be.
Yes, sir. Originally, when we did the integrated resource plan, we accounted for Glendale's share of 5 million electric vehicles, and that raised the load from 350 to 398, or just 400 megawatts. With Los Angeles's LA 100, they're anticipating a doubling of load with EV and electrification of buildings also. So we're thinking that it's going to go up, and I don't know if it's going to be double, but we definitely have to account for much more than what we've previously accounted for when we only were including the Glendale share of 5 million EVs.
I kept hearing this, we're up for the challenge, we're up for the challenge. Do we have new transmission lines coming in?
No, sir.
Did we change our mind on the 3 Wärtsilä engines to go to 5 or 6 in the last 2 weeks? The answer is no.
No, sir.
So the question is, we're talking about the distributed energy, the DER. Where are we going to get this power from? This is something that is relevant on this issue, on every issue, we're going to electrify our bus fleet. Come on, what are you guys saying? We're up for the challenge. That means we can do it. Can you do it, Mr. Najarian? I'm up for the challenge, but, I don't want to.
I think this is going to be a very difficult situation, because not only are we going to be required to meet the load, we're also going to be required to absorb solar energy when solar is not needed. So the demands on the distribution grid is going to be huge. We're working towards being able to make that resilient. And we're hoping that there's going to be other technologies that will allow us to have more import capability. But presently, I still believe that our import capability and our local generation causes a problem with actually meeting these mandates or these stretch goals.
Listen, we've made $100 million decisions based on our limited transmission ability. Now you're telling us you're hoping? I mean, I don't, I think you're being overly optimistic. Because we would have, I mean, if you told us, hey, we can transmit all we could need in a new technology, I'm sure the council would like to see what that is, but that doesn't exist now, does it?
No, sir.
Okay, all right, that's all. Thank you.
All right, who would like to speak next?
I'm fine. I'll go.
All right, Councilmember Devine.
Thank you to Dr. Jones and to everyone that worked on this report. Got good reviews on all of you, that it was very nice working with you. So, there are many long-term benefits.
Your microphone.
Anyway, I just thanked everyone for working on this. I won't repeat. There are many long-term benefits in implementing an all-electrification code, but in so doing, I just want to say to my colleagues that as leaders and decision makers, we must keep in mind Glendale's ability to provide or their inability to provide the power that is necessary for this electrification plan, for this REACH code. We've heard the impact it will have on the load required, but we have to be sure that steps are taken now, starting today, starting maybe tonight, to ensure the reliability of our power grid, and that is so very, very important. So anyway, as I said, I'm in favor of this, in favor of adopting the Title 24 with the amendments on the EV charging. I think it has to apply in multifamily to 100% of the units that are EV capable. The commission did not recommend EV ready. They recommended EV capable, and that's what I would recommend. I would require all new construction to be electric. The remodels we can bring back at a future date. The PV requirements, I'm in favor of. I'm trying to keep this brief because we've been here for a while. But anyway, I think that the Sustainability Office, Dr. Jones, the Sustainability Commission have come up with a good path forward. I do think we should include the battery storage in our future considerations of this. So I'm proud that we're going into this, the REACH code. Hopefully, I'm sure we're all going to approve it, but I think we also have to take into consideration the city's ability to make this be able to for this to come to fruition, because it's going to be a struggle, and we have to start now by implementing a pathway to providing the power for all of this electrification. Thank you.
Okay. Council members, anyone?
Go ahead. You want me?
All right, Councilmember Brotman.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, so let me just, well, first of all, thank you very much to staff, to Rincon Consultants. Ryan, is it? Ryan. Great work that you've done, and I want to make a shout out to Kate Unger, who really started working on this stuff with David probably 2 years ago, and brought the Building Decarbonization Coalition into the discussion, and I think it's been really, really a great collaboration between, advocates in the community, staff, and others. So thank you very much. I'm excited. This is about 2 years coming, so it's really great. I think this is a great progressive set of REACH codes that you're proposing, and I fully support them. I do want to mention a few things. I won't be too long, but the infeasibility waiver, I would like us to consider making that a relatively high barrier. Not to say no if it's truly infeasible, but to make that really based on technical considerations, not cost considerations. That's number one. And on major remodels, I really would like us to kick this off immediately so that we are in a position to implement a major remodel addition to our reach codes by the January 2024. I think really what we want to get at is primarily are buildings that are being torn down to the studs and rebuilt, as one of the callers said, and I think those should be all electric. These buildings are going to be with us for 50, 70, 80 years, and it's going to cost so much to redo that, to retrofit, so let's do it now. I would even like to see potentially major remodels being defined below that, like I think Santa Monica has something they're implementing now, which is if you change out 50% of the walls, or there's some formula that they have. So I would like us to look at what formula makes sense, where it's cost effective, where you're doing the kind of work where you're opening up walls and it's creating this opportunity for you to go all electric. So I would say that. So that's on the electrification. On solar, I think that we should go to 100% of offset if somebody can do that within that 50% of their rooftop space. There's no reason to scale that back. We have a goal that we've set as a council to maximize the amount of solar. GWP needs the power, and one of the limitations to putting in more batteries than we're already planning now is being able to charge those batteries. The more solar we can deliver from rooftops, the more batteries we can charge, and we can also get distributed batteries, and that's going to be really a key part of our solution here. So we need that local generation, and we should maximize it at every opportunity. So I would say 100% offset or 50% rooftop space, whichever is the least. And on EVs, I think, I'm not really sure that every single space needs to be EV capable, because people are going to share electric chargers. And if you showed a picture earlier in your presentation, and it had that charging station with multiple arms coming off of it, I think the reality in the future is going to be, shared. And people are not charging every single day. You don't need a dedicated charger for every single space. So I don't want to throw a bunch of unnecessary costs on development for something that's going to end up not necessarily being used. So I would like us to go beyond those Cal Green Tier 2, is it Tier 2 standards, which is, I think, 40% EV ready and 15%, what do you call that? No, there's that other thing, 50% EVSE, that's what it is, right?
It's correct, and it's 15% of that 40%,
Oh,
so it
of the
doesn't
40.
stack up to be 55%.
It doesn't stack up.
40%.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I know I'm kind of just throwing something against the wall here, but I would kind of like maybe a 50% number in total. So maybe it's 50%, and that 15%, I think would be good. Now for, I guess it's buildings with less than, or residential with less than 20 units, we're saying 40% ready and no EVSE. I think we should at least have some EVSE. I mean, even if it's just a couple, I think we should have some minimal number. But maybe 40% ready, and rather than 15%, maybe it's 5%, or maybe it's some flat number. So I'd like us to look at that. That's really what I would like to see. And yes, going forward, when we do look at kind of substantial remodels, I agree we should look at batteries. I don't know, I mean, batteries are expensive, and the cost effectiveness is probably challenging until we get to some kind of a time of use rate structure. But anyway, I think we should look at batteries. On the GWP plea for more resources, because really that's what it is. They're telling us, we need to help them out. And we do. We love you, and we know you've got a big, difficult task ahead, and you need more resources. We are going to have to spend a lot of money upgrading our distribution system. That's very clear, and making it smarter, right? I think you kind of overstated the case a little bit, because, you're talking about peak load, and not everybody's charging it at once. Not everybody's charging every day, and not everybody's charging at peak, or they shouldn't. We have to make sure that they're not, right? We need to have pricing signals that get people to charge off-peak. So you're not going to get, it's not one for one that this additional electricity demand is going to be at the peak. I mean, you got to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's part of the job. So I think a little bit overstated, but I do appreciate that and I think this is very cool that our utility, our GWP, is going to capture business from SoCalGas and Chevron. I think that's awesome. Keep it here. Keep the profits here. Keep the, or whatever, we don't call them profits. But anyway, capture that and make it clean. And you guys can do it. And I think that with the right amount of solar and the right amount of batteries, and I think LA is working on transmission. They know they need transmission to meet their 2035 goals. Mm-hmm. It may not be until 10 years out or something like that, but there's gonna be more transmission. We're gonna have to do something with hydrogen. We're gonna have to solve this. So let's just make sure that we get everything in place now when it's cheap to do with new construction so that we're ready and we're not adding additional costs.
Thank you. Councilmember Asatryan.
I'm going to try to keep this short. Agree with the 100% on solar. If we have the opportunity to provide that to them, that I think we should. The one thing I would want us to consider is electric buildings. I live in one, and units tend to cost more than if you're running on gas. And I want to see if we can think about incentive programs for families and multifamily units that are renting to make sure that we're offsetting this, and perhaps that 100% solar is the answer to that. When it comes to major remodels, I really would want us to either create an incentive program for it or hold off on it altogether. Construction costs are high already, and what I don't want is for residents who are trying to make remodels to their homes all of a sudden have to be paying a lot more because they have to incur these additional costs. I agree with the additional battery storage, and I don't think that we need 100% EV-capable parking spots. That's that for me.
Okay, Councilmember Najarian.
Thank you. I will also be brief. I am deeply and profoundly concerned that we will be able to provide the electricity to make this work. I base that on the information I got today from the GWP. We are scrambling. We are biting our nails to the bone to cover the 350 megawatt peak. What I'm hearing is a doubling, double 350, 600 to 700, perhaps even more. I don't know how we're going to do that. I don't know if the Sustainability Commission thought about that. I don't know if the decarbonization group thought about that. Maybe that wasn't their task. Maybe their task was to see how we could go with as little carbon. It's a serious concern that I have. We have transmission limitations. We have already thought about the distributed energy resources in our clean energy plan. It's not going to be enough to cover a doubling of our demand. I'm also concerned, and some people might laugh, oh, well, look at this, this is just something we should do. I understand that we won't be able to have gas-powered fireplaces, gas logs. That's a thing of they're not gas logs, but a gas-powered, either it's through a log or those little sparkly stones. Jacuzzi heaters, although a hot water heater works, but it does not have the efficiency of a gas-powered heater to provide the quick heating of a jacuzzi pool or a therapy pool. I'm concerned that people will not be able to barbecue with natural gas. So what's the alternative? I'm going to get charcoal and burn charcoal. And we know that charcoal is a much worse polluter than a natural gas. Are we going to ask people to lug propane back and forth? Probably. I think people are going to say, forget it. I'll just get the lighter fluid, poof, and we know how polluting that is. I'm going to vote for this, but on the record, I'm deeply concerned. I don't think that the review of this was balanced in any way. It was focused on how to implement the REACH codes, and I'll go through all of that, and that's fine. But and I'll even vote for this, but I want everyone to know I have deep and troubling concerns about this becoming a reality and about us meeting the energy demands of the city.
Sure. There was a comment from staff. Yes, our consultant would like to
I want to add a
respond.
little color to those comments. I think the concerns about how much demand electricity of increase we're going to see from EVs is predominantly the EVs, and that transition is going to happen over a long period of time. So with electric buildings, we're actually expecting to see a decrease in peak demand in the summertime. And that's because we're moving to heat pump technology, which is significantly more efficient than the air conditioners that we currently use. And that's what drives that summer peak. So switching to all electric buildings is actually going to decrease electricity demand during peak summer and increase demand during the winter, but still under where the peak is today. So an all electric building, especially with solar, especially when we start talking about batteries, is a huge grid balancing benefit. And yeah, as we move to, past 20, 30, 40% EVs, we're going to see grid impacts. That's going to be statewide, and there's going to be resources that come down to that. So I think there's a concern. I think it makes sense to start working on that now because we know it's coming. But this reach code is not going to put you there, but it is going to save you money in that transition later on. And these electric buildings are going to be, it's not that it wasn't thought about. It's part of the discussion for sure, and it's been since the beginning. And part of this code will actually help in that grid balancing that you're concerned about. So.
All right. So, any other comments? Councilman?
I wanted to make one.
Yes, please, Councilmember Devine. No, it's all right.
When I mentioned the EV, the 100% in the multifamily units, that would be 100% capable. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I keep forgetting. Sorry about that. I just want to make the comment that when I said that I would support multifamily units be 100% capable, because a lot of times in multifamily development, you are assigned parking spaces, and you never know if you're going to get an EV spot or a non-EV spot, or and so if the entire parking structure is EV capable, then everyone will have a shot at having an EV parking space. And that's why it would not, the tier 2 would continue to be for family homes, hotels, and motels. It would only be the multifamily units that would be, I would suggest, be 100% capable. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that we're taking some very important steps here in Glendale. I know that we've referenced some other cities, but truly I think in the region we're a leader in terms of sustainability, making sure that we're minimizing our carbon footprint. We've done a number of things over the last few years, actually longer than the last few years. Started probably about 3-4 years ago with the community getting active and vocal that are helping us see a better future. Electrification is part of that, but there are also concerns, as have been alluded to, and that's why we have to look at this holistically. There are certain things that our council has already voted on moving forward on that aren't ideal. None of us have relished doing it, but in order to get to where we need to get to, we need to have a bridge to get us there. And we have goals that we've stated, and we will move forward towards that goal of electrification, eliminating a lot of the use of fossil fuels. But as has been said, we will have to look at every possible way. Now, solar is one of those things that where if we don't use it, it's like throwing away a very ready, clean resource for producing energy. We as a council voted unanimously to make sure that we have more solar use in the city of Glendale, and we're going to hopefully work with our utility to make sure that happens, because we know that demand is going to go up, but in as much as we can allow people to take advantage of the sun's natural energy to meet some of their needs, most of their needs, whatever it may be, it will be to all our benefits. I know that we've, well, first of all, I also want to thank or secondly, I want to thank staff for their hard work in their presentation. I truly appreciate it. And the fact that you've had the sustainability division in our city manager's office work closely with our Glendale Water and Power staff. I appreciate the optimism of everyone in the room, including Councilmember Brotman, and he energizes me with his optimism as well. Again, I think that this is important for us to move ahead with the new construction aspect of it. I like the fact that there are ways for us to give people considerations to maintain what they already have in certain circumstances. I think it's important to perhaps also take into consideration some of Councilmember Najarian's points. I don't know if we necessarily need a hot tub carve-out, but if there is something that's for therapeutic reasons and there isn't a alternative, I certainly wouldn't want to be the person standing in the way of an individual and their good health because we didn't look at this from every angle. So and as much as we can have flexibility in those special circumstances to allow for that carve-outs in certain circumstances, the goal should be mainly electrification of appliances, especially in areas where we know it works. It's been working in other places. Convection ovens are gaining popularity, and they're being used in other parts of the world very successfully. So we should also consider that here as well on new construction. So with that, those are most of my comments. I mean, there's other things I could speak to, but I think in the interest of time, and we have a long evening ahead of us with still a closed session that we have to get through, that's all I'll say. So thank you very much. Would anyone like to make a motion to move forward? Councilmember Brotman.
Make a motion. Now, we are, just for clarification, we are directing staff to prepare a final ordinance that would then be presented to the building, whatever that commission is called, I can't remember.
Correct. Councilmember Brotman would direct staff to prepare an ordinance that will come back to the council for adoption and then submitted to the California.
Come back to the council for, okay. So my motion would be that we go forward with the REACH codes as proposed, with the exception of increasing that solar offset component to 100%. I would recommend increasing those Cal Green T2 standards for electric vehicle charging to, I'll just put it out there, 50% EV ready, and in buildings with less than 20 units, at least 5%, but maybe staff can consider whether a fixed number is appropriate or what. And I would like to direct staff to begin working on major remodels and battery storage immediately. That would be my...
That's your motion?
My motion.
All right, thank you. Is there a second? Okay.
No one
There's
second?
no second? Is there anyone who, well, is there a substitute motion? Is there questions?
Or an amendment?
I'd like to amend just for the multifamily, to have it 100% EV capable.
Capable?
So that, because when, if you're assigned a parking space and you have it doesn't always, they don't always say to you, which parking space would you like? It's like, this is yours.
No.
And so that's the only other, everything else I agree with.
I mean, I can do that. I just want to make one comment, if I could, on that, is that, I mean, we can't really predict how charging is going to work in the future, but I think that we will most likely see shared spaces just because of the cost of putting those in, of putting the chargers in, shared where you can reserve, it won't necessarily just be your space. So I'm a little hesitant to push to 100% when that might be, a cost that's not necessarily going to ever be recouped. But I'm okay if you feel strongly about it. I mean,
well, I'd like to know about the cost. Is it what are we looking at here? I mean, is there a huge cost to making this capable?
It's around $800-900 a space to add the EV capable, because it's panel capacity, so it could increase the size of the electric panel at some point, depending on the number of spaces, and it's conduit going to that space. So on average, the studies we looked at are about $800 a space.
Could we split the difference and say it's 75%
Okay.
capable?
Sure.
Capable.
No, I'm good with that. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so I've accepted that friendly amendment. Is there another one?
Yes. On major remodels, could we add that it has to be there has to be an incentive program with the current, if we're going to push for major remodels now, if we're going to start implementing that, then there's
Well, this
some
is for
sort of.
staff. Yeah, this is for staff to come back and work on that. I mean, I think maybe you're thinking of retrofitting existing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if you tear a house down to the studs and you put it back up, that should be all electric. You don't need incentives for that because that's cost effective.
Okay.
But I think that's still open for them to, they're going to still
They're still
work on
gonna-
that and come
okay,
back to
then
us,
I'm
and
fine
I'm
with
sure
that.
we'll have all the opportunities. So,
Yeah, I'll second your
okay,
motion.
Okay, so now we have a motion, we have a second. Hopefully staff took all of that in, has made note of it. I think I have, I know I have, but we're gonna go to the roll call.
Council members Asatrian,
Yes.
Brotman,
yes.
Divine,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Mayor Kasakian.
Yes, congratulations, thank you very much, thank you, staff. Yet another feather in our cap. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the special meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we stand adjourned at 4:36 PM, and I'll wait until we have a changeover on the screen of the city council meeting before we call it to order for the closed session. Okay, I'd like to call to order the city council meeting for September 13, 2022. May we have roll call, please?
Council members Asatrian,
Here?
Brotman,
Here.
Divine,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Kasakian.
Here. I'd like to have the closed session items read into the record. Clerk Abajan, please.
Yes. Closed session, item A, conference with legal counsel pending litigation, Saderi versus City of Glendale et al., LASC case number 20STCV34372. B, conference with legal counsel pending litigation, Glen Oaks Canyon Homeowners Association versus City of Glendale, LASC case number 22STCP0011. C, public employee appointment, Fire Chief. D, public employee appointment, Director of Community Development. E, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure litigation pursuant to paragraph subdivisions D2 and E2 of section 54956.9, one potential case. F, conference with labor negotiators. The city designated negotiaters attending the closed session are Rubik Golanian, Michael J. Garcia, Jillian Van Maiden, John Taktalian, Paula Adams, Amy Martin, Jason Bradford, Carl Povolatis, and Laura Colty. The name of the employee organization is Glendale Management Association.
All right, thank you very much. By the way, for the record, it's our September 13th meeting. I don't know what I said, but thank you, Councilmember Asatrian, for catching that. I was reading something else while I was calling it to order. Mr. Garcia, are we anticipating reporting out on any of these items?
Mr. Mayor, we're anticipating reporting on items 1C and 1D.
All right, with that, we will recess to closed session.
Oh, my, stand up. Dan, I would have gone for 50.